Welcome back, legends. You're at Supreme Harry. Another incredible story awaits. What if a Gringotts ritual revealed Harry was heir to all ancient houses and rightful king of Britain? Subscribe and hit the bell. Let's dive right in. Chapter 1, The Vault That Remembers. The letter arrived at 4 in the morning. Harry was already awake. He usually was on the nights before his birthday, not from excitement but from the particular kind of dread that came from living in a house where your birthday was treated like an inconvenience. He was sitting on the edge of his bed, staring at the crack of orange streetlight coming through the gap in the curtains, when the owl hit his window with the kind of urgency that meant something important had either happened or was about to. He crossed the room and unlatched the window. The owl, a severe-looking tawny he didn't recognize, bearing a wax seal of a goblin's profile stamped in black, dropped the letter and left without waiting for a response. No treat begging, no affectionate nip at his fingers. Just the letter, and then gone. Harry broke the seal. Mr. Potter, you are hereby summoned to Gringotts Wizarding Bank on the morning of July 31st at 9 o'clock sharp. This summons pertains to the matter of your inheritance ritual, which has been delayed beyond all legal and contractual limits recognized by the Goblin Accord of 1347. Failure to appear will be treated as a breach of ancestral covenant. Director Ragnarok will oversee the proceedings personally. This summons is not optional. Gringotts Wizarding Bank London Branch. Harry read it twice. Then he set it carefully on his desk, lay back down on his bed, and stared at the ceiling with the distinct feeling that the world had just shifted an inch to the left. He didn't sleep. Instead he thought about the words, delayed beyond all legal and contractual limits, and about what exactly that meant, and about who might have been doing the delaying. By the time morning came and Aunt Petunia banged on his door to remind him that breakfast wouldn't make itself, he had a name in mind. He just didn't have the anger yet. That would come later. He told Petunia he had business in London. She stared at him with that particular expression she reserved for anything involving magic, somewhere between contempt and the low-grade fear she'd never fully managed to hide, and said nothing. Vernon was already at work. Dudley was still asleep. Harry dressed in the least threadbare of his oversized hand-me-downs, put his wand in his back pocket, and walked out the front door at 8 without looking back. The night bus deposited him at the Leaky Cauldron at 20 to 9, which gave him just enough time to walk through the pub, wave off Tom's cheerful "Good morning, Mr. Potter," and step into Diagon Alley before the morning crowd had fully assembled. Gringotts looked the same as it always did from the outside, white marble gleaming in the July sun, goblin guards at the top of the steps, the bronze doors catching the light. But as Harry climbed the stairs, one of the guards, a goblin he'd never seen take any notice of a human visitor before, looked directly at him, placed a fist to its chest, and inclined its head about half an inch. Harry stopped for half a second, then kept moving. Inside, he gave his name to the teller nearest the entrance. The teller, mid-transaction with a portly wizard in lime green robes, stopped everything, passed the transaction to a colleague without a word of apology to the affronted wizard, and came around the counter with the kind of purposeful efficiency that made everyone in the marble hall glance over. "Mr. Potter. Director Ragnarok is expecting you. Follow me." They went through a side door Harry had never been through before, down a corridor that sloped gently downward, past two sets of locked iron doors that swung open ahead of them and swung shut behind, into a part of the bank that smelled like old stone and something else, something electric and warm that Harry couldn't name. The lamps here were not the chandelier kind from the main hall. They were wall-set, amber-glassed, and they cast a light that was less about illumination and more about atmosphere. The room they arrived at was round, with a floor that was a single piece of dark, polished stone. In the center was a shallow circular basin, about 3 feet across, set flush with the floor, filled with what looked like still, dark water. Around the basin, carved directly into the stone, were symbols Harry didn't recognize and suspected were very, very old. 5 goblin officials stood at equal intervals around the room's perimeter, perfectly still. At the far end, behind a desk of dark wood that had not a single piece of parchment on it, sat a goblin who could only be Ragnarok. Harry had seen senior goblins before, but Ragnarok looked like what all the others were aspiring to. Old in the way that mountains were old, with eyes the color of polished bronze that missed absolutely nothing. He was dressed in formal black, a chain of office across his chest, and he looked at Harry with an expression that Harry read as the controlled version of something very close to satisfaction. "Mr. Potter," Ragnock said. His voice was lower than Harry expected. "You came alone." "The letter said the summons wasn't optional," Harry said. "I figured if it wasn't optional, I didn't need to ask permission." Something shifted in Ragnock's expression. The bronze eyes moved in what might, on a different face, have been a smile. "Sit." Harry sat in the single chair placed before the desk. The teller who'd escorted him withdrew and the door closed with a sound like a vault locking. Ragnock folded his hands on the desk. "You are 15 years old today." "That's right. Your inheritance ritual should have been performed at age 11, when you first presented yourself to our bank. The Goblin Accord requires it. Your family vault manager sent notification to your magical guardian 3 times, at 11, at 12, and at 13. Ragnock's voice did not rise, but the temperature of it dropped several degrees. Each notification was acknowledged. No ritual was scheduled. Harry went very still. Your magical guardian, Ragnock continued, is Albus Percival Wulfric Brian Dumbledore, headmaster of Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry. I know who he is, Harry said quietly. Then you will want to know this. Under the terms of the Goblin Accord, a delayed inheritance ritual carries penalties. Interest. Accumulated access fees for trusts you were unaware of. And in certain cases, Ragnock paused, and the pause felt deliberate, it carries the legal obligation for full disclosure of everything that was withheld. We cannot return the years you were denied access. But we can ensure you receive everything at once. Harry looked at the basin. And that's what this is. That is what this is. The ritual itself is simple. A few drops of blood, a spoken intent, and the ancestral record will do the rest. Ragnock pushed a small black knife across the desk. The blade was silver. The handle was bone, engraved with the same symbols as the floor. I must warn you, Mr. Potter. In my 400 years as director of this bank, I have overseen 11,000 inheritance rituals. What we believe you carry, based on preliminary assessment of your family lines, is unlike anything I have personally witnessed. Harry picked up the knife. How do you mean? I mean, Ragnock said carefully, that there are very few people in this room who would be unsurprised by what the basin reveals. He stood and moved to stand opposite Harry across the water. The 5 goblin officials around the room straightened. Are you ready? Harry thought about the letter. The words delayed beyond all legal and contractual limits. He thought about the notifications Dumbledore had acknowledged 3 times and never acted on, and about all the things he hadn't known about his own life that he probably should have, and about the 4 years of being told where to go and what to do and what to sacrifice and who to trust. Yes, he said. I'm ready. He drew the blade across his palm, it was sharper than anything he'd ever held, and the cut was clean, more precise than painful. He held his hand over the basin and let 3 drops fall into the dark water. Speak your intent, Ragnock said. Harry James Potter. I claim my inheritance in full. The drops spread through the water like ink through silk, and then the basin lit up. Not metaphorically. The dark water began to glow, gold first, then silver, then a deep and ancient green that Harry felt in his chest more than saw with his eyes. The symbols on the floor responded in sequence, each one brightening as though awakening from sleep, spreading outward from the basin in a ring, and then the ring spread to the walls, and the walls began to, there was no other word for it, remember. Names appeared on the surface of the water, written in light, rising from the deep. House of Potter. Ancient and noble. House of Peveril. Ancient and most noble. House of Gryffindor. Ancient and most noble. Founder's line. Harry felt the first spike of shock hit him and forced himself to breathe. House of Ravenclaw. Ancient and most noble. Founder's line. House of Slytherin. Ancient and most noble. Founder's line. The fifth name rose slower than the others, as though it had been buried deeper. House of Merlin. Eternal and sovereign. Direct descent. And then, rising last, in gold that burned brighter than the rest, in characters that were not English but that Harry somehow read as easily as his own name, House of Emrys. Royal blood. King's line. Undisputed heir to the throne of magical Britain. The room was absolutely silent. Harry stared at the water for a long moment. Then he looked up at Ragnarok. "That last one," he said. "How literally should I take it?" Ragnarok's expression was unreadable. "In my experience, Mr. Potter, the ancestral basin is entirely literal. It has no capacity for metaphor." He looked at the water with something that was unmistakably reverence. "The line of Emrys has not produced an heir in 300 years. The king's laws, the ancestral seat, the throne itself, these have all been dormant. Under goblin law and the oldest magical covenants this world contains, they are now yours." Harry sat with this for a moment. Outside, somewhere far above them, London was going about its morning. Buses and pigeons and someone arguing over a parking space. And down here in the dark, under a mountain of old marble, he was finding out that he was apparently the king of something. He found, to his own slight surprise, that he wasn't particularly overwhelmed. He was angry, in a clean, steady way, and he was curious, and he felt something shifting inside him that he couldn't quite name yet, like a key turning in a lock that had been rusted shut for years. "Tell me about the trusts," he said. The next 2 hours were the most information-dense of Harry's life, and he'd once sat through a Hermione study session before OWL season. The Potter family trust alone, which should have been accessible since he turned 11, had accumulated 4 years of compounding interest on assets that included 3 manors, a seat on the Wisengamot, and enough gold to make the number Ragnarok quoted him meaningless in any practical sense. Harry just nodded and moved on. The Peveril Trust was older and stranger. It included items from the vault that Harry was told he could examine at his leisure, but it also included something Ragnarok clearly considered more significant than gold. The Peveril line maintained an ancestral library, the director explained. Not a physical one. A magical archive. Memory-bound knowledge from every head of the House of Peveril, stretching back to the brothers themselves. He paused. Every qualified heir can access it. You simply think of a memory you wish to see, and the archive answers. Harry filed this away. And the founders? Ragnarok inclined his head. 3 of the 4. Potter blood carries dormant descent from Gryffindor and Ravenclaw through separate lines. The Slytherin connection is through the Peveril-Gaunt marriage of 1402. He delivered this piece of information with the precision of someone who had checked it multiple times and was very sure of it. Through Slytherin, the Parseltongue gift is confirmed as ancestral, not a Voldemort transfer, as was commonly theorized. Harry had always suspected that was wrong. He'd just never had the documentation. "The Merlin line," he said. "The House of Emrys." Ragnarok looked at him for a moment before answering. "Merlin Ambrosius," he said, "did not simply advise the kings of Old Britain. He was the magical authority of this island. The throne he established, separate from the mundane monarchy, governing the magical world, passed through his bloodline until the line was believed extinct in the 17th century. It was not extinct. It was, he chose his word carefully, concealed. By whom, and for what purpose, the record does not indicate. By someone with access to genealogical records and the ability to alter them, Harry said. That would be one interpretation, yes. Harry thought about a man who had been the most powerful wizard in Britain for the better part of a century, who had collected powerful rolls the way other people collected hats, headmaster, chief warlock, supreme mugwump, and who had, 3 times, been formally notified that Harry's inheritance ritual was overdue and done nothing. "I want copies of everything," Harry said. "Every document, every notation, every communication between this bank and my magical guardian." We anticipated this request. Ragnock nodded to one of the goblin officials, who placed a thick leather portfolio on the desk. Everything is here, including the original notifications sent to Albus Dumbledore and the acknowledgement receipts bearing his signature. Harry picked up the portfolio. He didn't open it yet. He just held it. There's one more matter, Ragnock said. He reached beneath his desk and produced something that Harry had not expected, a box, flat and wide, made of wood so dark it was nearly black, bound with iron and set with a single amber stone the same color as the lamps in the corridor. He placed it on the desk between them and stepped back. We were entrusted with this, Ragnock said, by the last confirmed heir of the Emery's line. 300 years ago. Along with instructions that it be given to the next heir whose blood activated the king's line. He paused. The instruction specified that we give it only when the heir was ready to claim, not merely to inherit. The distinction, we were told, was important. Harry looked at the box. Then he looked at Ragnock. What's the difference? Inheritance is passive, Ragnock said. Claiming is a declaration of intent. Harry reached out and lifted the lid. Inside, on a bed of black velvet, lay a ring. Gold band, thick and plain, set with a stone that was neither gem nor glass but something older. It was clear in a way that felt deep, and inside it, very faintly, something moved, like light through water. Around the outer band were engravings so fine Harry had to lean close, for symbols, one on each quadrant, each one slightly different from the others. He knew without being told that the symbols represented the founders. And something older beneath them. He picked it up. It was warm, which rings shouldn't be. He put it on his right hand, index finger, because that felt right, and the moment it settled into place, every engraved symbol in the room flared at once, a single, sharp pulse of gold light that faded as quickly as it came. All 5 goblin officials placed their fists to their chests. Ragnock bowed his head. The goblin nation, Ragnock said, and his voice had a different quality now, not deferential exactly, but formal in a way that felt as old as the stone they were standing on, acknowledges the claim of the heir of Emery's and fulfills our ancient obligation of witness. We stand in accord. Harry looked at the ring on his finger. Then he looked up. Ragnock, he said. I'm going to need your help. Not just your record-keeping. He held the director's gaze. I mean the kind of help that only the Goblin Nation can provide. Information. Legal standing. The weight of the oldest covenants in Britain. Ragnock studied him for a long moment. In return, Harry said, when I've sorted out the state of things, and I will sort it out, the Goblin Nation gets a renegotiated accord. Written by representatives of both sides, not imposed by a ministry that treats you like a necessary inconvenience. The silence stretched. Then Ragnock did something Harry had never seen a goblin do. He smiled. Not warmly, not softly, it was sharp and satisfied and old. I believe, the director said, that we understand each other, Mr. Potter. They took him to his vault after that, not the modest stone chamber with the chest of gold he'd been visiting since he was 11, but the real Potter vault, 7 levels deeper, accessible only by blood and the ring he was now wearing. The cart ride down was longer than any he'd taken before, through tunnels that moved and branched and occasionally opened into caverns so large he couldn't see the far wall, until they arrived at a door that was taller than any in the bank above. The vault was vast. Harry walked through it the way you walked through a place that hadn't been touched in decades, carefully, without assuming anything. There was gold, obviously, more gold than he could conceptualize as real, but there was also shelving that ran the full height of the vault walls, covered in everything from books to weaponry to objects he had no name for. There were portrait frames, small and large, most of them empty or containing painted figures who had not yet moved, as though they were sleeping. In the center of the vault, on a stand of plain iron, was a single object that drew the eye the way the others didn't. A sword. Not Gryffindor's sword, which Harry had pulled from a hat and used to kill a basilisk, but something different, plainer, in a way, and more serious. Dark steel blade with a single edge, no ornamentation on the guard except the same 4 symbols from the ring, and a pommel of amber stone identical to the one on the box. He didn't take the sword. Not today. He wasn't sure why, only that it didn't feel like the right moment. He did take a book from the 3rd shelf, slim, bound in something that wasn't leather, with no title on the cover. He opened it and found the handwriting inside was clear and unhurried, as though the author had all the time in the world. If you are reading this, the blood held. I always believed it would. You will have questions. Start with the memory archive. The answers are not in ink, they are in experience. You will understand what I mean when you access it for the first time. Do not let them reduce you. They will try. J.P. Harry stood in the vault of his ancestors, holding a letter from a father he barely remembered, wearing a ring that the goblins had held for 300 years in trust for him, and let the full strange weight of the morning settle over him. Then he closed the book, tucked it under his arm, and headed back up. By midday he was sitting on a bench in a quiet corner of Diagon Alley, the leather portfolio open on his lap, working through it with the kind of focus that surprised even him. He'd bought a sandwich from a nearby shop and eaten half of it without noticing. The other half sat forgotten beside him. The documents were exactly what Ragnarok had described. 3 notices, each more formally worded than the last, sent to Albus Dumbledore at addresses that included Hogwarts and the Hog's Head, and a third that simply said the Chief Warlock's address. 3 acknowledgement receipts, each bearing a looping, unmistakable signature. The dates made Harry's jaw tighten. The first was from August 1991, 2 weeks before he started Hogwarts. The second from July 1992. The third from September 1993, which meant Dumbledore had received the 3rd notice at the start of Harry's 3rd year, the year Sirius Black escaped, the year everything had been so complicated and fraught, and had still not acted. What Harry couldn't yet determine was why. He had guesses, and they weren't charitable, but he didn't make the mistake of assuming the obvious answer was the full answer. Dumbledore was not a simple man. If he had deliberately delayed Harry's inheritance ritual, he had a reason, and the reason mattered. Not because it would change what Harry planned to do next, but because you needed to understand an obstacle fully before you moved around it. He slipped the documents back into the portfolio and sat for a moment, watching the foot traffic of Diagon Alley without really seeing it. He thought about the ancestral memory archive. The Peveril Goblin had explained it in terms that were precise without being entirely clear. The archive was stored within the ring, accessible through the stone, requiring only intent and focus to enter. It wasn't passive, like looking at a pensieve. It was active, an inheritance of experience, not just information. He hadn't tried it yet because he wanted to do it somewhere he couldn't be interrupted. He thought about what his parents' house, Potter Manor, which apparently sat on 140 acres in Godric's Hollow and had been sealed under blood ward since the night of October 31, 1981, would feel like when he walked into it. He thought about Dumbledore. He thought about a prophecy that had been used to shape his entire existence, and about how much of that shaping had been choosing not to tell him things. The anger was still there, clean and steady as a lit candle. He didn't feed it and he didn't dismiss it. He just let it burn. He had one more stop to make before he left Diagon Alley. He walked to Flourish and Blots, went directly to the legal section, and selected 3 books, Ancient Magical Law and Its Practical Applications, The King's Covenant, A History of Magical Governance in Britain, and a slim, dry-looking volume called Wisengamot Procedure and Precedent, 14th edition. He paid for them with gold from the new vault key Ragnarok had given him, added them to the portfolio under his arm, and went to get the night bus home. He had a lot of reading to do. He was back in his room at Privet Drive by 2 in the afternoon, the door locked, the window open an inch, the portfolio spread across his desk and the 3 books from Flourish and Blot stacked beside it. He'd already moved the ring from his right index finger to his left hand and back again twice without meaning to. It seemed to move toward his dominant hand on its own, which was the sort of thing he was choosing to simply accept rather than investigate right now. He opened the King's Covenant first, because the title was the most directly relevant, and found within the first 10 pages that it was both dry as dust and utterly fascinating, because what it described was a system of governance that predated everything Harry had been taught about the magical world. Before the Ministry. Before the Wizengamot in its current form. Before Hogwarts, even. A magical monarchy, with its own laws, its own courts, its own obligations, a system that had not been dissolved but abandoned, dormant, still technically in force because no one had ever gone through the proper legal channels to dismantle it. He found the paragraph he was looking for on page 47. The King's law holds that the confirmed heir of the royal seat, having undergone the ancestral ritual of recognition and received the seal of Emrys, may at any time invoke his ancient authority in matters of governance, law, and justice. The invocation does not require ministry approval, Wizengamot ratification, or the consent of any currently serving official. The King's law predates all such institutions and supersedes them in all matters of fundamental magical law. Harry read this paragraph 3 times. Then he wrote, very carefully, on a fresh piece of parchment, a short list. At the top he wrote a single name, Albus Dumbledore. Below it he wrote 3 questions, not as accusations but as genuine queries he needed answered before he decided what to do. Then he wrote a second name, Sirius Black. And he thought about Sirius, living in Grimmauld Place or wherever the Order had him stashed now, cooped up and slowly going mad, and about the trial Sirius had never received, had never been given, had been sent to Azkaban without. And Harry thought about an old book calling the King's Law something that superseded all currently serving institutions. He picked up his quill and underlined Sirius Black's name twice. There was a knock at his bedroom door. It was Dudley, which was unusual, bearing a rather startled expression and a glass of orange juice he held out at arm's length like a peace offering. "Mum says you missed lunch," he said. "She wanted me to bring this up." Harry took the glass. "Thanks." Dudley lingered, which was more unusual. He glanced at the desk, at the books and parchment and the portfolio, at the ring on Harry's hand that he most certainly hadn't been wearing when he left this morning. He opened his mouth, thought better of it, and turned to leave. "Dudley," Harry said. His cousin stopped. "Things are going to change," Harry said. He wasn't sure why he was saying it. Maybe because it was the first time he'd said it aloud and he wanted to hear what it sounded like. "For me, I mean. A lot of things." Dudley looked at him for a moment with the oddly perceptive expression he'd occasionally shown since the Dementor incident, the one that reminded Harry that beneath all the conditioning, his cousin was not actually stupid. Good changes or bad ones? Harry considered the question seriously. "I don't know yet. Both, probably." He picked up his quill. "Mostly good, I think." Dudley nodded slowly, then left without another word, pulling the door shut behind him. Harry turned back to his desk. Outside, the afternoon light was shifting toward gold, and Privet Drive was going about the stifling, ordinary business of being Privet Drive, and Harry sat in the middle of it with the sum total of centuries of blood and legacy pressing quietly against his chest like something waiting to wake up. He opened his notebook to a clean page. At the top, he wrote, "What I know. What I need to know. What I'm going to do." He started writing. He didn't stop until dark. Chapter 2, The weight of old names. The ancestral memory archive felt like falling sideways. Harry had waited until 2 in the morning, when the house was dead quiet and even Vernon's television-induced snoring had faded, before he tried it. He sat on his bed with his back against the headboard, ring on his right hand, left hand flat on the slim book his father had left in the vault, and pressed his thumb to the amber stone the way something instinctive told him to. The room didn't disappear. That was the first thing he noticed. He didn't go anywhere. Instead, somewhere came to him. A library assembled itself around his perception like a stage set being constructed at speed, shelves rising out of nothing, warm amber light following them up, the smell of old parchment and wood smoke and something faintly mineral arriving before the visual details fully resolved. He was still in his bedroom at Privet Drive. He was also standing in the center of a circular room lined floor to ceiling with books that were not books, that were memories given physical form, each spine glowing faintly with the particular warmth of something preserved and waiting. A figure was sitting in the chair nearest the fireplace. Harry looked at him carefully. The man was young, mid-twenties at most, dark red hair, square jaw, the kind of quiet confidence in the set of his shoulders that Harry recognized in the mirror sometimes and had never understood the source of. He was dressed in clothes that were old but not ancient, early 20th century maybe, reading a book of his own with the focused ease of someone who had nowhere else to be. He looked up when Harry entered. "Ah," the man said. "Good. You found it." "You're in my head," Harry said. "I'm in the archive." The man closed his book. "There's a difference. I'm not a fragment of someone's consciousness, I'm more like a recording with a very good index system." He had a voice like the letter in the vault, unhurried. "Fleamont Potter. Your grandfather. Sit down, Harry. We have rather a lot to cover." Harry sat. Because there was a chair, and because his legs decided independently that sitting was fine, and because Fleamont Potter was looking at him with an expression that was both completely new and terribly familiar. "How much do you know?" Fleamont asked. "As of this morning?" "All of it, I think. Or at least the outline." "Tell me the outline." Harry did. He laid it out quickly and clearly: the ritual, the basin, the houses, the king's line, the ring, the 3 unopened notifications in Dumbledore's name. He kept his voice level and his face neutral and watched his grandfather's expression as he spoke, cataloguing what moved there. Fleamont listened without interrupting. When Harry finished, the older man was quiet for a moment, looking at the fire with the expression of someone doing arithmetic. "The Dumbledore notifications," he said. "You're not angry." "I'm very angry," Harry said. "I'm just not only angry." Fleamont looked at him then, and something in his expression shifted into something warmer and more complicated. "Your father was exactly like that," he said quietly. The anger in him was always patient. He waited for it to know what shape it wanted to take before he acted on it. He paused. "Your mother was less patient but more precise. Between the two of them you've inherited an interesting combination. Can we talk about what the king's line actually means?" Harry said. "Practically speaking." "Practically speaking," Fleamont said, leaning forward, "it means you have authority that supersedes every institution currently governing magical Britain. The ministry, the Wizengamot, the chief warlock's office, all of them derive from structures that were built around the absence of a king. They fill the vacuum. You're the vacuum's end. The book I found said the king's law predates all of them. It does. And it was never dissolved. The Wizengamot would very much like to pretend otherwise, but the legal reality," Fleamont tilted his head, "is that the moment you invoked your claim and the basin confirmed it, you became the highest legal authority in magical Britain. Not by conquest. By blood and covenant." Harry thought about this. "The ministry won't simply accept that." "Of course not. Cornelius Fudge will have a spectacular tantrum. Half the Wizengamot will pretend the old laws don't exist. A quarter will try to bury them in procedural objections." Fleamont smiled thinly. "But a fair portion of the old houses, the ones whose own ancient covenants bind them to the king's line, will find that they have very little choice but to acknowledge the claim. And the Goblin Nation's formal witness changes the legal landscape considerably. Ragnarok said the goblins would stand in accord. Then you have a foundation." Fleamont sat back. "What you need now is people. Not followers, you're not collecting followers. You need advisors, allies, people whose loyalty is to the idea of what you're building rather than to you personally. The latter kind are a liability. The former kind are a foundation." Harry nodded slowly. He was already thinking about Hermione. He'd been thinking about her since the vault, and the thinking had the quality of something settled and obvious. If there was anyone whose loyalty was to the idea rather than the person, it was her. "Hermione Granger," Fleamont said, as though reading the thought off Harry's face. You know her. I know of her. The archive has a capacity for context that's difficult to explain. She's exceptional. She is also, and this is important, someone who will tell you when you're wrong, and keep telling you until you listen. He paused. You need that more than you need anything else right now. What about Dumbledore? The fire crackled. Fleamont was quiet for a moment in a way that felt weighted. Albus Dumbledore, he said finally, is not an evil man. I want you to hold on to that, because when you're sitting across from him and you're angry and the evidence is in your hands, it will be tempting to make him into something simpler than he is. He looked at Harry directly. He is a man who looked at a prophecy, at a terrified world, and at a child who needed to be a certain kind of weapon, and he made a choice. He decided that you being king complicated the simplicity of the sacrifice he thought was necessary. Harry felt the anger shift slightly in quality. He thought the sacrifice was necessary. He thought it was inevitable. Perhaps the same thing, to him. Fleamont's voice was careful. He built you to be brave and loyal and selfless because those were the qualities the weapon needed. He may not have fully considered what he was preventing you from becoming in the process. And what was he preventing me from becoming? Fleamont looked at him for a long moment. What you already are, he said quietly. What the blood was always going to make you, given the chance. Harry looked at the ring on his finger. In the amber light of the archive library, the stone at its center looked like it contained its own small sun. Right, he said. So I talked to Dumbledore. But I don't ask his permission for anything. You don't need it. I know. Harry stood. The library remained assembled around him, solid, stable, patient. I'll come back. There's more I need to understand about the Founder's inheritances. There's a great deal more, Fleamont agreed. The Ravenclaw legacy alone will take several sessions. And there is something in the Slytherin bequest that you need to know about before you act on anything publicly. He paused. Something that changes the nature of your connection to Voldemort more significantly than you currently understand. Harry filed this away carefully. Tomorrow night. I'll be here, Fleamont said. I'm always here. The library folded itself away gently, like a book being closed, and Harry was back in his room at Privet Drive, sitting in the dark, with the sound of summer insects coming through the crack in the window. He picked up his quill and added 2 items to his list. He was asleep within 10 minutes, which surprised him. He'd expected to lie awake. Instead, the moment his head hit the pillow, he went down into a dreamless dark that felt less like unconsciousness and more like rest he'd been owed for years. He wrote 2 letters in the morning. The first was to Hermione, short and precise, I need to see you. Not an owl conversation, in person, as soon as possible. I've had a significant morning. Several things have changed. I'll explain everything when I see you. Can you come to London? The Leaky Cauldron, any day this week. The second letter took him longer to write. He addressed it to Albus Dumbledore, and he spent 20 minutes on 4 sentences, choosing each word with the particular care of someone who understands that how you say a thing determines what happens next. Professor Dumbledore, I underwent my inheritance ritual at Gringotts on July 31st. I believe you know what that means. I'd like to speak with you, not at Hogwarts, and not with the order present. Grimmauld Place, if Sirius is there. July 5th, midday. This isn't a request for guidance. I think you know that too. Harry Potter. He sent both letters with Hedwig, who departed with her customary dignity and no particular hurry, as though she found the urgency of humans faintly tiresome. He watched her go from the window, then turned back to his desk and opened Ancient Magical Law and its practical applications to the chapter on ancestral house claiming procedures. He had reading to do. Hermione's reply came that evening, tomorrow. 10 o'clock. I'll be there. Harry, what happened? He smiled, folded her letter, and went to have dinner with the Dursleys, who were pretending he didn't exist with their usual practiced precision. He ate his food and thought about the Wisengamot and said nothing, which was the same as every other dinner he'd eaten in this house for 15 years. The difference was that now he knew it was temporary, not as a vague hope but as a concrete fact, and that made the silence easier to sit in. Dumbledore's reply did not come that night. It came the following morning, delivered not by owl but by a small, flame-colored bird that Harry had never seen before, not a phoenix, something smaller, which dropped a letter on his desk and disappeared in a spark. The handwriting was Dumbledore's. "My dear Harry, I believe that conversation is very much overdue. Grimmauld Place, the 5th, at midday. Sirius will be expecting you. There are things I should have told you long ago. I am aware of this." Albus Harry read it twice. He noted the absence of the usual elaborate pleasantries, the customary warmth that Dumbledore deployed like furniture, filling a room with its comfort. What was left was brief and unornamented and sounded, Harry thought, like a man who had been expecting this for a while. He folded the letter and put it in the portfolio. Hermione was already there when he arrived at the Leaky Cauldron the next morning, sitting at a corner table with a cup of tea and a notebook, her quill moving with the quick efficiency of someone taking notes on something she'd been reading. The book open beside her tea was one of the same titles Harry had bought 3 days ago, The King's Covenant, and she had already got further into it than he had. She looked up when he sat down and opened her mouth. "Before you ask," Harry said, "yes, all of it is real, yes, I've verified it with primary documentation, and yes, I know it's a lot." Hermione closed her mouth. Then she said, very deliberately, "Start from the beginning." He did. He laid out everything, in order, with the same clean efficiency he'd used with Fleamont in the archive, the letter, the ritual, the basin, the names and the light, the ring, the vaults, the documents, Ragnarok's formal witness. Hermione listened with her quill in her hand and her notebook open, and she didn't interrupt once, which for Hermione was a considerable act of discipline. Her expression moved through several distinct stages, startled, skeptical, re-evaluating, convinced, and finally settling into something that looked like the particular focus she reserved for very large, very interesting problems. When he finished she was quiet for a moment, looking at her notes. "The Goblin Accord of 1347, she said. "What about it?" "I read about it last night after I got your letter. I wanted to be prepared." She turned to a page in her notebook. "The Accord establishes that inheritance rights under ancient magical blood law take precedence over any subsequently created legislation. It's never been overturned because nobody's ever had reason to invoke it in a context this significant. The Ministry has been able to ignore it because no claim of sufficient weight has been made." She looked up. "Until now. That's my read too. The King's Covenant laws," she continued, moving down her notes, "are genuinely still in force. I checked 3 separate legal sources last night. Nobody's ever formally dissolved them. They're just dormant. Dormant. Which means the moment you invoke them, they're active." She set her quill down. "Harry. Do you understand what this means legally?" "I think I understand more than people expect me to." She looked at him for a moment, really looked at him, the kind of look Hermione gave things when she was assessing rather than reading, and something shifted in her expression. Something she filed away thoughtfully. "You're different," she said. 2 days ago I found out I'm heir to 5 major magical houses, a founder line, and an ancient monarchy. I'd be worried if I wasn't different. Not that." She shook her head slightly. "You're the same, but steadier. Like something's been resolved." She picked her quill back up. "Okay. What do you need from me?" This was the moment Harry had been thinking about since the vault. He leaned forward. "I need someone who will tell me when I'm wrong. Not someone who'll follow me because the blood says I'm right, but someone who'll actually read the law, understand the strategy, and argue with me when the argument needs to be had." He held her gaze. "I need an advisor. A real one." Hermione was quiet for 3 seconds. "This is real," she said. "You're actually doing this?" "Yes. You're going to claim the throne of magical Britain. I'm going to restore legal order to magical Britain, Harry said. The throne is the mechanism. The goal is to end the war, free Sirius, fix Azkaban, and make it so that what happened to my parents, to your family during the last war, can't happen again because the law actually has teeth. He paused. The throne is a tool. I'm not interested in it for its own sake. Hermione was quiet for a long moment. Harry could see her thinking, the way her eyes moved slightly when she was working through a complex problem, following logical branches to their conclusions. Dumbledore, she said finally. I'm meeting him in 3 days. He knew, she said. It wasn't a question. 3 notifications. Signed receipts. Her jaw tightened. He made you into something specific. Something manageable. She said it the way she said things when she was angry but had decided the anger was less useful than clarity. He needed you not to know. I know. But I don't think he did it out of malice. Malice would be simpler, Hermione said flatly. Benevolent control is harder to argue against because it comes wrapped in genuine care. She picked up her copy of the King's Covenant. I want to be at the Dumbledore meeting. Done. She blinked. She'd been prepared to argue for it. Just like that. You're my advisor. You should be there. She looked at him for a moment, and he could see her recalibrating something. All right, she said softly. All right. Then, more briskly, I need to read everything in that portfolio. All the Gringotts documents. And I want a full list of the houses with their Wisengamot seats before we go to Dumbledore, because I want to know exactly what legal standing you have before anyone tries to diminish it. Harry slid the portfolio across the table. Hermione opened it and started reading. 2 minutes in, her quill was moving. They sat there for 3 hours. Tom brought them more tea without being asked and diplomatically did not ask why Harry Potter and his bushy-haired friend were surrounded by ancient legal documents on a Tuesday morning. The leaky cauldron was quiet at that hour, just a few traveling witches at a table near the window and a wizard asleep at the bar. The Slytherin connection, Hermione said, around the 2-hour mark, not looking up from the document she was reading. Through the Peveril Gaunt line. My grandfather mentioned there was something specific about it I needed to know. About Voldemort. She did look up then. You've been in the archive? Night before last. What was it like? Like talking to someone who's been waiting a long time and is very glad you finally showed up. Harry paused. I met Fleamont Potter. My grandfather. Hermione's expression softened into something private and complicated. That must have been strange. It was. He picked up his tea. Good strange. She held his gaze for a moment, then nodded and went back to reading. I want to go into the archive too, she said. At some point. If that's possible. Harry hadn't thought about whether it was. He looked at the ring. I'll find out. He went back into the archive that night, and the night after, and by the third night he had covered enough ground that the shape of things had changed from outline to architecture. Fleamont walked him through the Ravenclaw inheritance, a deep structural gift for magical theory that Harry hadn't known he had, more subtle than power, more like a quality of understanding, an instinct for the underlying logic of spells that made everything he'd ever learned sharpen slightly in his memory, like adjusting the focus on a telescope. He'd spent half an hour going back through spells he'd learned and seen their construction clearly for the first time. The Slytherin bequest was what Fleamont had promised it would be, significant. Your Parseltongue, Fleamont said, on the second night, was never a transfer from Voldemort. The Slytherin blood had it dormant in your line. The night of the attack, when Voldemort's curse struck you, the magic didn't simply rebound. There was an interaction, an exchange. You gave him something. Harry went still. What did I give him? The block, Fleamont said. The suppression that prevented you from accessing your full inheritance. It wasn't something Dumbledore did. It was something Voldemort's curse left behind, a piece of dark magic that embedded itself in your inheritance record, creating a false reading. Making it appear that your bloodline was simpler than it was. He paused. The Gringotts ritual, when it activated, burned it away. That's why the basin was so dramatic. It wasn't just reading your heritage, it was removing an obstruction. Harry sat with this for a long moment. He cursed my inheritance. Unintentionally, I think. The curse that night was catastrophic magic even by dark art standards, it shattered in ways not even Voldemort could have predicted. The fragment in you is the Horcrux your Dumbledore undoubtedly knows about. But the suppression effect on your inheritance was separate. Collateral damage. Fleamont looked at him carefully. This also means that in the exchange, Voldemort received something from you. What? We don't know precisely. But the king's line carries a quality that has no name in modern magical theory. It's the oldest form of magical authority in Britain, and it has a quality of claim to this land, this magical territory. A small fragment of it is in him. He held Harry's gaze. Which is why he has never been able to fully leave Britain. Why he always returns here. He is bound to this land by a piece of you. Harry stared at the fire. And when I destroy the Horcrux in me, that connection severs. And his binding to this land severs with it. He becomes weaker here, not stronger. Fleamont said it quietly. The very thing he stole from you will be what undoes him. Harry looked at his hands for a moment, at the ring. Then he looked up. Right, he said. I need to know everything about the King's Law invocation procedures before I go to meet Dumbledore. Fleamont looked at him with the expression Harry had already begun to recognize as something specific to his grandfather, the expression of a man who was proud of someone and knew better than to say so directly. Where would you like to start? The Wisengamot seat protocols, Harry said. All of them. The morning of the 5th was overcast, London grey and warm in the particular airless way of city summers. Harry dressed in clothes that were actually his own. He'd spent an hour in Diagon Alley 2 days prior, because the heir to 5 major magical houses wearing a dead man's hand-me-down trousers to meet Dumbledore felt wrong in a way he couldn't entirely justify, and arrived at Grimmauld Place at 5 minutes to noon. Hermione was waiting outside number 12, a leather satchel over her shoulder, her copy of Ancient Magical Law tucked under her arm with a dozen slips of parchment marking pages. She looked at his new clothes and didn't say anything about them, which was its own kind of comment. Ready, he said. I've been ready since Tuesday, she said. Let's go. The door opened before they knocked. Sirius was standing in the hallway, and the sight of him hit Harry the way it always did, the ghost of what he should be visible in what he was. Sirius at 36 looked like a photograph developed with the wrong chemicals, the bones of someone who had once been striking, imperfectly restored. But his eyes were bright, and when he saw Harry, he pulled him into a hug that had the grip of someone who'd been in a box too long and was very relieved to see something real. Happy belated birthday, Sirius said, stepping back. He glanced at Harry's ring and went still. The expression that moved across his face was complicated. You went to Gringotts. You knew about the ritual. I knew it should have happened. I didn't know Albus had been sitting on it. He said Dumbledore's name with a flat neutrality that cost him something. He's in the kitchen. The kitchen at Grimmauld Place was large enough for the meeting and gloomy enough to feel like every difficult conversation Harry had ever imagined having. Dumbledore was sitting at the end of the long table, half-moon spectacles on, hands folded. He looked older than he had at the end of term. Not frail, never frail, but like someone who had been carrying weight they'd been meaning to put down. Harry sat across from him. Hermione sat beside Harry, opened her satchel, placed the portfolio on the table between them, and said nothing. Sirius leaned against the wall near the door. Dumbledore looked at the portfolio. Then he looked at Harry. You received my letter, he said. You said there were things you should have told me long ago, Harry said. I'd like to hear them. Yes. Dumbledore was quiet for a moment. I believe I owe you the truth, Harry, unfiltered by strategy for perhaps the first time. He glanced at Hermione. "Miss Granger." "Sir," Hermione said. Dumbledore looked back at Harry. "The notifications from Gringotts, I have them," Harry said. "Signed receipts for all three." "Yes." No flinch. No deflection. "I received them, and I chose not to act on them. I want to explain my reasoning, not to excuse it." "Go ahead." "The prophecy," Dumbledore said, and Harry felt Sirius stiffen at the wall, "established a framework in my mind. It described a boy who would have power the Dark Lord knew not, and I believe I understood that power to be your willingness to sacrifice yourself. Your love, your selflessness, your humility." He paused. "A king is none of those things, or rather, a king is those things complicated by authority, by rights, by an understanding of their own power that changes how they move through the world." He looked at Harry steadily. "I was afraid that if you knew what you were, you would become harder to save." The kitchen was very quiet. "You were afraid I'd fight instead of die," Harry said. Dumbledore's expression was something Harry had never seen from him before, unguarded. "Yes. And if I'd known," Harry said, slowly, "I might have found another way. One that didn't require me to die at all." "That possibility occurred to me," Dumbledore said quietly. "I dismissed it. I was wrong to." Harry sat back. He looked at the man across from him, the most powerful wizard in Britain, the greatest of his generation, who had looked at a 15-year-old's death and thought it was a necessary instrument and had spent 4 years quietly making sure that boy would go to it without the information that might have let him choose differently. The anger was still there, clean and steady. Harry let it be exactly what it was and not a thing more. "I'm not going to die for this war," Harry said. "Not because I'm unwilling to sacrifice, but because I'm not a weapon. I'm an heir. And the difference matters." He leaned forward slightly. "What I need to know is whether you're going to be an obstacle or an asset. Because I'm moving forward either way." Dumbledore looked at him for a long moment. Then, slowly, something in his expression settled into something Harry read as, not relief, exactly, but something adjacent to it. The expression of a man who had been waiting for someone to make a decision he hadn't been able to make himself. "I have never," Dumbledore said quietly, "wanted to be your obstacle." "Good." Harry turned to Hermione. She opened the portfolio and slid a specific document across the table to Dumbledore, the Gringotts summary of Harry's confirmed bloodlines, in neat goblin script, with Ragnarok's formal witness seal at the bottom. Dumbledore looked at it for a long moment without speaking. "The king's line," Dumbledore said. "Confirmed," Harry said. "Emry's descent, royal blood, all of it. With the goblin nation's formal accord." He paused. "The legal implications are significant. You know this better than almost anyone." Dumbledore set the document down. "What do you intend to do?" "First," Harry said, "Sirius gets a trial. A real one. I'm invoking King's law to compel a formal hearing. The ministry cannot refuse a royal compellence under the old statutes, and I have confirmed legal standing to issue one." He looked at Sirius, who was staring at him with an expression that was somewhere between shock and something raw. "He's been in this house long enough." Sirius pushed off the wall. "Harry, it's not a favor," Harry said, to Sirius, and his voice was steady. "It's what was always owed to you. I'm just the first person in a position to collect the debt." Sirius sat down heavily in a chair. He didn't say anything else. He didn't need to. Harry turned back to Dumbledore. "Second. I'm calling a meeting of the allied houses. The ones whose ancestral covenants bind them to the king's line. I need a count of seats before I enter the Wizengamot." He glanced at Hermione. 17 confirmed seats based on the bloodline documentation, she said crisply. "Possibly 22 if the affiliated houses honor their secondary oaths." 22 seats, Harry said, is a majority. The weight of that settled over the kitchen like a change in air pressure. Dumbledore looked at Harry for a long time. Then he said, very quietly, "You are not what I built you to be." "No," Harry agreed. "I'm what I actually am." He picked up the portfolio. "I'd like your support, Professor. Genuinely. Not your management, your support. There's a difference." He met the old man's eyes. "I think you know that too." Dumbledore looked at him for a long moment, and Harry read something in his expression that he hadn't expected. Not resistance. Not calculation. Something closer to what Fleamont had looked like in the archive, when Harry had asked the right question. Pride. Complicated and a little painful and completely genuine. "You have it," Dumbledore said. "What little I can offer you that you don't already possess." Harry nodded once. Then he stood and picked up the portfolio. "Good. Hermione will be in touch about the Wisengamot procedure." He paused at the door. "One more thing." Dumbledore looked up. "The Horcrux," Harry said. "In me. I know about it. And I know how to deal with it without dying." He watched something shift in Dumbledore's face, shock first, then a rapid recalculation. The archive was very informative. He looked at the man steadily. "I'd appreciate it if you didn't lose any more sleep trying to figure out how to tell me." He and Hermione left the kitchen. Behind them, Harry heard Sirius let out a breath that sounded like it had been held for a very long time. In the dark corridor, Hermione gripped his arm briefly. Not speaking. Just present. And that, Harry thought, was exactly the kind of ally you needed when you were about to start a war through parliamentary procedure. They walked out of number 12 together into the grey London afternoon. 22 seats, Hermione said quietly, as they walked. 22 seats, Harry agreed. Lucius Malfoy is going to lose his mind. Yes, Harry said, with the particular satisfaction of someone who had thought about this in advance. He is. Chapter 3, The Court of Swords. The Owls went out on the morning of July 8. Hermione had drafted them, 12 letters, each one precisely calibrated to the house it addressed, formal without being stiff, authoritative without being threatening. Harry had read every word and changed almost nothing, which she'd taken as the compliment it was. They bore his seal, a wax impression from the signet face of the ring, the 4 founder symbols pressed into deep burgundy wax, and they were delivered simultaneously, because timing mattered. You didn't let one house know before another. You gave them all the information at the same moment, so that no one could claim advantage or run to the ministry with advance warning. The letters were brief. They stated that the heir of Emrys had confirmed his claim, that the Goblin nation stood in accord, and that he was calling the first formal convening of allied houses in 3 centuries. The date was July 12. The location was Potter Manor, which Harry had formally unsealed 2 days prior with a hand pressed to the gate and something in the blood wards that had recognized him with a sound like a deep bell rung once, far underground. He'd stood at the gate of Potter Manor for a moment before going in. The house sat back from a long drive, stone and old timber, larger than he'd expected, 3 stories, a walled garden, the frame of something that had once been well-loved and was now patient. It smelled like earth and old magic and, very faintly, like something warm that he couldn't name but that settled in his chest like a hand on a shoulder. He'd walked through every room before he'd done anything else. Taken an hour to just be there, in the house where his parents had lived before Godric's Hollow, where his grandfather had written the letter he'd found in the vault. The rooms were covered in dust sheets and cobwebs and the particular stillness of a place that has been holding its breath. He'd opened windows as he went, letting the summer air in, and by the time he reached the upstairs study and found his mother's handwriting on a stack of notes left on the desk, spell theory, half-worked problems, her thinking preserved in ink, he'd sat down quietly and spent another 20 minutes just holding the papers. Then he'd gone back downstairs and started making it ready for 12 guests. Creature had appeared without being summoned. Harry had looked at the old house elf, who was examining the manor's kitchen with the expression of an architect looking at promising ruins, and said, "Can you manage this?" Creature had given him a look that conveyed, without words, that "can you manage this?" was a deeply insulting question. He'd had the ground floor ready within a day. Neville Longbottom arrived first, on the morning of the 12th, which surprised Harry and then, when he thought about it, didn't. He came alone, no family escort, no owl announcing him in advance. He simply walked up the drive at 9 in the morning, 2 hours before anyone else was expected, in clothes that were slightly too formal for the weather and carrying a small wrapped package. He rang the bell, old brass, deep tone, and when Harry opened the door himself, Neville stood there looking like a man who had made a decision and was seeing it through. "I wanted to be here first," Neville said. "I thought that mattered." "It does," Harry said, and stepped back to let him in. They sat in the study with tea, which Creature produced with the air of someone who found the informality mildly objectionable. Neville looked around the room, at the bookshelves, at the portraits that had begun to wake since Harry's return, at the ring on Harry's finger, and said nothing for a moment. "Gran knows I'm here," he said finally. "She's not coming. She wanted to, but she thought it would complicate things, her being on the Wizengamot." He paused. "She wanted me to tell you that she believes in the claim, and that House Longbottom honors its ancestral covenant." "Your grandmother is a remarkable woman," Harry said. "She's terrifying," Neville said, with a warmth that made it a compliment. He set the wrapped package on the desk. "This is from me. Not from the house. Just from me." Harry unwrapped it. Inside was a copy of 1200 Uses of Magical Plants in Ritual and Combat, which Neville had apparently found in the Longbottom library. There was a note tucked inside the cover in Neville's careful handwriting: "Chapter 7 might be relevant sooner than you think." Harry filed this away and looked at his friend across the desk. Neville had changed over the past year in ways that were easy to miss if you weren't paying attention. He'd grown into his frame. The anxiety that used to sit at the front of his expression had moved further back, replaced by something steadier. He still second-guessed himself sometimes, but less automatically, and the second-guessing had more to do with prudence than fear. "You didn't come here just to deliver a book," Harry said. "No," Neville agreed. He was quiet for a moment, looking at his hands. "After the Department of Mysteries," he said, "after everything, I spent a lot of time thinking about what I was actually for. You know. Not just being at Hogwarts, not just surviving. What I was for." He looked up. "My parents are at St. Mungo's because of this war. Have been since I was a baby. And I've been angry about that for a long time, but quietly, because I didn't know what to do with it." Harry waited. "I know what to do with it now," Neville said simply. "I want to help you end this. Not help from a distance. Actually help." "What are you offering, specifically?" Neville met his eyes. "House Longbottom's ancestral covenant gives you a Wizengamot seat and a sworn position. The sworn position is first defender of the king's peace." He paused. "I looked it up in the Longbottom archives. It's the oldest title we hold. It means I swear direct personal loyalty, not the house, me, and in return, I serve as the first knight of your court." He said it plainly, without theatrics. "I know that sounds medieval." "It sounds honest," Harry said. Neville nodded once. "I'm not doing it because you're Harry Potter. I'm doing it because you're the right person for this and because it's the right thing." He paused. "And also because you've had my back since first year and someone should have yours properly." Harry looked at his friend for a moment. "You understand this means being a target." "I'm already a target," Neville said. "I'd rather be a target with a purpose." Harry stood. He thought about the procedure Fleamont had shown him in the archive, the King's Compact, simple and direct, 2 people and a spoken word and the ring between them. He came around the desk. "Stand up," he said. Neville stood. Harry held out his right hand, ring facing outward. "Repeat after me," he said, and he spoke the words from the archive, the old words that his grandfather had walked him through, short and weighted and absolutely clear. Neville repeated each line back steadily, without hesitation, his voice calm. When it was done, the ring pulsed once, warm, brief, like a heartbeat, and the amber stone brightened by a fraction. "That's it?" Neville said. "That's it," Harry said. "The magic takes care of the rest." Neville looked at his own hand as though expecting something visible. Then he looked up and grinned, slightly crooked, genuine. Right then. The others arrived between 11 and noon. Lady Greengrass came with her eldest daughter, Daphne, who watched everything with pale eyes and said nothing but missed nothing either. Lord Abbot arrived with 3 senior members of his house and a formal declaration of covenant that he handed Harry on folded parchment the moment he crossed the threshold, with the slightly aggressive correctness of someone who wanted their position stated immediately and unambiguously. Lord Davis came alone and spent 10 minutes examining the portraits in the entry hall before he said a word to anyone, which Harry found more interesting than off-putting. The most surprising arrival was Andromeda Tonks, Ted Tonks' wife, Sirius's cousin, Bellatrix's sister, who arrived with her daughter Nymphadora and a quiet ferocity that reminded Harry of Sirius but without the wildness. She'd received a letter because she was, through her black blood, the closest thing to a representative house Black could currently field. She walked in, looked Harry up and down without ceremony, and said, "You have your mother's eyes and your grandfather Fleamont's manner. I knew both of them. Don't waste what you've inherited." Then she walked through to the drawing room like she'd been in the house before. Tonks, who was trailing behind her mother in aura robes, caught Harry's expression and grinned. "She's like that with everyone," she said cheerfully. "Don't take it personally. Or do, actually, she's nicer to people she respects. The Tracys, the Knotts, the elder Knott, cautious and grey-haired, who had made quiet distance from Voldemort for reasons he kept private, the Bones representative, a second cousin of Amelia Bones who'd received the letter and shown up looking slightly stunned by his own presence, and 3 more besides. By noon, the drawing room of Potter Manor held a gathering that had not been assembled in 300 years, and Harry stood at the head of it wearing his new clothes and his old ring and the particular stillness that had settled into him since Gringotts, and looked out at faces that ranged from eager to calculating to cautious to something that looked very much like hope. He didn't make a speech. He'd thought about it and decided against it, because speeches were for people who needed to be convinced, and everyone in this room had come voluntarily. "You're here because the blood covenant is real," he said, simply, "and because you know it. We're not here to debate the claim. We're here to decide what to do with it." He looked around the room. "The ministry is a mess. The Wizengamot is compromised. Voldemort has people inside both. And we have a legal mechanism that supersedes all of it, if we use it correctly." He paused. "What I need from you today is honest assessment. What your houses can offer, what they can't, what lines you won't cross. I don't want promises you can't keep." The room was quiet for a moment. Then Lord Abbot, who had the manner of someone who respected directness almost as a reflex, said, "Seats. We've between us 17 confirmed Wizengamot seats. Abbot holds 3. 14 more if the secondary oaths are honored," Hermione said, from her position to Harry's right, where she'd been standing with her notebook open since before anyone arrived. "The secondary oaths," Lord Davis said, looking at Hermione with assessment that was more respectful than dismissive, "require a formal request from the royal seat. They don't activate on their own." "I'm aware," Hermione said. "I've drafted the formal request. It's ready to issue as soon as we've confirmed the primary seats." Davis looked from Hermione to Harry. "Your advisor is very prepared." "That's why she's my advisor," Harry said. Andromeda Tonks had been watching from her chair near the window with an expression that was now unmistakably approving. "The secondary oath houses include Macmillan and Greengrass Secondary Branch," she said. "And the Bones main line, if Amelia Bones honors it." "My aunt knows about this meeting," the Bones representative said carefully. "Then she'll have made up her mind already," Harry said. "We'll find out shortly." He looked at the room. "The Wizengamot session I'm planning is in 3 weeks. Before that, I'm invoking King's law for a compelled hearing. Sirius Black has been held without trial for 14 years. That ends first. He watched the room's reaction. If the royal authority means anything, it means the law applies to everyone. Including the people the ministry finds inconvenient. There was a murmur through the room. Not disagreement, something more like the sound people made when they heard something said aloud that they'd been thinking privately. Lucius Malfoy, Lord Greengrass said. His voice was the careful neutral of a man who was navigating proximity to a name that mattered. He has 7 Wisingamot votes through proxies and affiliations. He'll move against this. Yes, Harry said. He will. Do you have a plan for that? Several. Harry didn't elaborate yet. He looked at Neville, standing at his right shoulder, whose expression was steady and attentive. What I need before the session is to know that every person in this room has confirmed their position to their own satisfaction. If there's doubt, say it now. He looked around deliberately. There's no shame in wanting more time. There's a significant problem with saying yes today and no later. Nobody spoke. Lord Knott, who had been quiet for the full meeting, said, House Knott has no love for the current order. We stand with the claim. The room settled after that, into the particular quiet of people who have made a decision and are now thinking about its implications. Harry let it sit. Then Tonks raised her hand, a gesture so instinctively school-like that several people looked startled. Practical question, she said. What are you actually going to do? Not politically. What happens to Voldemort? Everyone looked at Harry. I'm going to face him, Harry said. But on my terms, not his. And with a full understanding of what the connection between us actually is. He said it plainly, without drama. The short version is that I know things about that connection that change the equation. When the time comes, it won't be the kind of fight he's expecting. Tonks considered this. You're not scared of him. I'm appropriately cautious, Harry said. That's different. Neville made a sound that was very nearly a laugh, quickly converted to a cough. Andromeda Tonks looked at Harry with her precise, assessing gaze and said, to no one in particular, Merlin's line, indeed. The meeting broke up in the early afternoon, the various houses departing with the particular manner of people who had arrived uncertain and were leaving decided. The Greengrass women were the last to go, Lady Greengrass pausing at the door to exchange a few words with Hermione about procedural details, Daphne hanging back long enough to look at Harry directly for the first time all afternoon. You know most of them will be watching each other as much as they're watching you, she said. It was quiet enough that only Harry heard it. They've spent 20 years maneuvering around each other. Old habits. I know, Harry said. Then you know that one of them will talk. She said it without accusation, just observation. Not maliciously, necessarily. But someone in the chain will say something to someone who'll say something to someone who's in Malfoy's pocket. Harry looked at her. I'm counting on it. She blinked, then a slow understanding moved across her face. You want Malfoy to know. I want Malfoy to have just enough information to make a move, Harry said, before I've given him the full picture of what he's moving against. He held her gaze. Thank you for the observation, though. It was a good one. Daphne Greengrass looked at him for a moment with the expression of someone recalculating something significant. Then she turned and followed her mother out the door without another word. Harry looked at Hermione, who had appeared silently at his shoulder. She's sharp, Hermione said. Very, Harry agreed. Make a note. The letter from Lucius Malfoy arrived the next morning. It was formal, beautifully written on heavy cream parchment, the Malfoy seal stamped in silver. The tone was precisely calibrated, not threatening, not obsequious, something carefully placed between concern and authority. It addressed Harry as Mr. Potter, which was notable given that Harry was now in possession of enough titles to fill a formal document. The choice of Mr. Potter was deliberate, a small adjustment of framing, a refusal to acknowledge the claim by simply declining to use the language that went with it. It has come to my attention, the letter read, that certain actions have recently been taken pertaining to ancestral legal matters. I write as a senior member of the Wisingamot and a long-standing guardian of magical tradition in Britain to note that any claims predicated on preministry legal structures would require formal submission to the Wisingamot for verification and approval before carrying any enforceable weight. I would be happy to discuss these matters at your convenience, and I urge caution in proceeding without the proper institutional endorsement. Yours in Magical Fellowship, Lucius Malfoy. Harry read it twice, in the same careful way he read all communication from people who were choosing their words like chess pieces. Then he passed it to Hermione. She read it and her expression was the particular one she wore when she found something academically offensive. Verification and approval, she said. The Wisingamot doesn't have the authority to verify or approve a king's claim. The claim doesn't derive from the Wisingamot. It predates it. He knows this. He knows this, Harry agreed. He's trying to establish a narrative. Get it out there that your claim is subject to institutional approval before you can argue otherwise. She set the letter down. He's also, she said thoughtfully, being very careful not to threaten you directly. He doesn't know what I have yet, Harry said. He knows about the meeting, probably. He knows about the Gringotts ritual. But he doesn't know about the archive, or what I know about Voldemort, or the depth of the legal preparation. He picked up his quill. I'm going to reply. Hermione looked at him. What are you going to say? Something that will make him very uncomfortable, Harry said, without being impolite about it. He wrote for 5 minutes, and the letter he produced was shorter than Malfoy's, on plain Potter Manor parchment with his proper seal, and it read, Lord Malfoy, thank you for your letter. I appreciate the clarity of your concern. I must respectfully correct a point of law, the King's Covenant, which remains in full legal force and was confirmed without dissolution, does not derive from the Wisingamot and is therefore not subject to its approval. The Goblin Nation's formal accord under the Accord of 1347 constitutes the only verification legally required. Both have been obtained. I look forward to seeing you at the Wisingamot session on the 31st, at which point we can discuss these matters in the appropriate forum. Harry James Potter, heir of Emrys, Lord of the Houses of Potter, Peveril, Gryffindor, Ravenclaw, Slytherin, and Merlin. He used the full title list at the bottom deliberately, because Malfoy had used Mr. Potter deliberately, and language was currency and you spent it intentionally. Hermione read it. Then she said, the 31st. I moved the session date, Harry said. I'm going to send formal notice today. The compelled hearing for Sirius goes in first. I'll file that on the 14th under King's Law. The Wisingamot session is the 31st. I want the hearing done and the result established before I walk into the Wisingamot. Hermione was quiet for a moment. Because a confirmed exoneration of Sirius Black demonstrates that the King's Law has actual operational teeth before you walk into the formal political arena. It turns an argument about whether I have power into a demonstration that I do, Harry said. Yes. She sat down and opened her notebook. We need to draft the royal compellence for the hearing. I've been working on the template. It needs your seal and a formal statement of grounds. She flipped to a page dense with her handwriting. I've identified 3 separate legal precedents for compelled trials under King's Law, 2 from the 15th century and 1 from the 17th, which is the most recent before the dormancy. She looked up. Harry, when they receive this, the ministry is going to panic. Cornelius Fudge is going to panic, Harry said. There's a difference. The ministry has people in it who've been waiting for exactly this kind of legal opening. He thought about Amelia Bones, who the Bones representative had confirmed was aware of the meeting. Some of them will be very relieved. The compellence document took 2 days to finalize, not because it was complicated but because Hermione rewrote the ground section 4 times, each time making it more airtight, more precise, more unanswerable. When Harry finally signed it and pressed his seal into the wax, she held it up and looked at it in the light with the expression of someone looking at a very elegant proof. He filed it with the Ministry's Department of Magical Law Enforcement on the morning of July 14th, delivered by a Gringotts legal courier, a goblin in formal dark robes who walked into the ministry atrium at 9 in the morning, presented the document at the reception desk, and departed without speaking to anyone. Harry was not there for this. He was at Potter Manor, in the study, deep in the memory archive, going over the specific protocols for Wizengamot address. But he heard about the reaction before noon. Tonks appeared at the manor's front door at 11:30, in aura robes, looking like she'd come directly from the ministry. "It's beautiful chaos," she said, the moment Harry opened the door. "Absolute beautiful chaos." Fudge got the document at 9:15 and by 9:30 he'd called 3 emergency meetings and sent owls to 4 different barristers. She was grinning. "The head of the DMLE, though, Amelia Bones," Harry said. "Read it," sat quietly for about 2 minutes, and then said, and I'm quoting, because I was standing right there, "It's airtight. Schedule the hearing." Tonks's grin widened. Fudge nearly had a fit. She told him that if he obstructed a royal compellence he would be personally liable under a legal statute that hadn't been invoked in 300 years, and she had no intention of being in the room when that happened. Harry felt something warm and satisfied settle in his chest. "When is the hearing scheduled?" "July 20th. Tonks looked at him. 6 days. 6 days. Harry thought about Sirius, in Grimmauld Place, who he'd sent a letter to that morning but hadn't yet received a response from. 6 days and Sirius would be in a courtroom, and this time there would be a lawyer, and this time there would be evidence, and this time the royal authority would be sitting in the gallery making it very clear to every Wizengamot member present that the days of convenient legal amnesia were finished. "There's something else," Tonks said. She reached into her aura robe and produced a folded piece of parchment. "This came through unofficial channels. Someone in the Department of Mystery sent it addressed to you, no name on it, came through a goblin liaison account I'm technically not supposed to know about." She handed it over. "I didn't read it. But the seal on it is the unspeakable's mark, which means someone very deep in the ministry is reaching out without the ministry knowing." Harry broke the seal and read. The letter was short, in a handwriting he didn't recognize, on plain parchment with no identifying marks. "The Horcrux question is known to more people than you think. 3 of us. We have been trying to find a solution for 2 years. There is a method. It does not require death. It requires something that until this week, we believed nobody had access to. The King's Compact changes this. We need to speak. We will find you. Be patient." Harry folded the letter slowly. "Good or bad?" Tonks asked. "Interesting," Harry said, which was its own kind of answer. He went back inside, added the letter to the portfolio, and stood for a moment at the study window looking out at the garden, where the late afternoon sun was turning the old stone walls gold. Somewhere in there a bird was having an argument with itself about territory. He had 6 days before Sirius's hearing. 17 days before the Wizengamot. A Horcrux in his chest that might have a solution he hadn't known about. And somewhere in the ministry, 3 people who'd been working on his problem before they even knew his problem was his. The war was not over. Voldemort was quiet but not absent. Harry felt that quiet the way you felt weather changing, a pressure drop, the stillness before something moved. The ancestral link through the Slytherin bequest meant he could feel Voldemort's presence like a distant radio frequency, always present at the edge of the signal. He'd learned, in the archive, that the frequency went both ways. Which meant Voldemort could feel him too. And what Voldemort was feeling, Harry knew, was something different from what he'd felt since the night in the graveyard. Not the frightened defiance of a boy clinging to a portkey. Something older, and more settled, and considerably harder to extinguish. Harry turned from the window and went back to his desk. He had letters to write. Luna Lovegood's letter arrived that evening, which was not a surprise because Harry had owed her with the others, but the content of the letter was a surprise in the particular way that Luna's communications usually were. "Dear Harry, I was glad to hear from you. I've been expecting it, though not quite this week. I thought it would be a Thursday. I have some information for you. I've been told I'm not supposed to have it, which I think means I definitely should give it to you. The Crumplehorn Snorkack expedition that my father and I took last summer passed through an area in the Scottish Highlands that I think you'll find significant. There's a place there that the old records call the King's Seat, not a metaphor, an actual location. It responded when I touched the stones. Daddy says I was probably imagining things, but I have photographs. Also, there is a man in the ministry who is not what he appears to be. He works in magical records and his name is not his name. I noticed because his shadow falls the wrong way on Tuesdays. I'd very much like to come to Potter Manor if that's all right. I have more. Love, Luna. Harry read it twice. Then he read it a third time. He'd learned, over 4 years of knowing Luna Lovegood, that there were two kinds of statements in her correspondence, the ones that sounded strange and were strange, and the ones that sounded strange and turned out to be entirely accurate described through an unusual lens. The man in magical records whose name was not his name belonged, Harry's instincts told him, firmly in the second category. He wrote back immediately, "Come Thursday." Then he went back to the archive, because Fleamont had promised him something about the King's Seat, a physical location, something to do with the oldest layer of the claim, and he wanted to ask whether it was what Luna had found. The library assembled itself around him. Fleamont was in his chair. "The King's Seat," Harry said, without preamble. Fleamont looked at him with a slight expression of impressed surprise. "You found it." "I didn't. Luna Lovegood found it." Harry sat. "What is it?" "It's where the claim becomes sovereign," Fleamont said. "Not just legal, elemental. The magical land of Britain has a center point, and the King's Seat is built on it. When the last heir of Emrys stood there and claimed the land itself, not just the title," he paused, "it's where the full depth of what you are becomes real. Not a document. Not a ritual. A fact of the earth." He looked at Harry carefully. "It's also the one place where Voldemort's magic does not function. It never has. The land rejects him." Harry was quiet for a moment. "Because he carries a piece of the king's line stolen from me. Because he carries something that doesn't belong to him," Fleamont agreed, "in a place where belonging is everything." Harry stared at the fire. The shape of something was assembling itself in his mind, not a plan yet, more like a strategic landscape, a map of where things were and where they needed to be. The Wizengamot session. Sirius's trial. The King's Seat. The Horcrux. The Unspeakables who'd been working on the solution. Lucius Malfoy, moving his chess pieces in the dark. Luna, with her photographs and her accurate strangeness. Hermione, making the law into a weapon no one had thought to pick up. And Voldemort, somewhere to the north, feeling the pressure change and not yet knowing what had changed. "I'm going to need a sword," Harry said. Fleamont raised an eyebrow. "Not symbolically," Harry said. "The one in the vault. The dark steel one." He looked at his grandfather. "I'm going to need it before the Wizengamot session." Fleamont studied him for a long moment. "It's not just a sword," he said. "I know. You can't pick it up until the King's Seat confirms the elemental claim. Before that, it's just well-made steel." "Then I need to go to the King's Seat before the 31st, Harry said. Fleamont looked at him with that expression, pride, slightly painful, completely genuine. "Scotland," he said. "The Cairngorms. Luna's photographs will show you a stone formation. You'll recognize it." Harry nodded slowly, added this to the architecture assembling in his mind, and turned to look directly at his grandfather. "One more thing. The Horcrux, the Unspeakables said the King's Compact changes the solution. Do you know how?" Fleamont was quiet for a long moment. "The King's Compact," he said finally, "is the oldest magical covenant in Britain. It binds land, blood, and intent. And a Horcrux is a piece of severed soul, bound by dark magic." He looked at Harry steadily. Light strong enough, old enough, and rooted enough in what this land actually is, can dissolve the binding without destroying the vessel. He paused. You are the vessel. And the king's seat is the light. The fire crackled. Outside the archive, somewhere in the real world, Potter Manor settled into its old stones under the summer night sky. Harry sat with the knowledge, quiet and enormous, and let it become something he carried rather than something that carried him. Right, he said. Tell me everything about the seat. Chapter 4, The Old Laws Have Teeth. The courtroom hadn't changed in 14 years. Harry sat in the gallery of courtroom 10 on the morning of July 20th and looked at the stone walls, the tiered benches, the chair with its chains at the center of the floor, and thought about a 12-year-old boy who had sat in that chair and been shouted at by a room full of adults and come within 3 votes of expulsion. He thought about a different boy, 15 years before that, dragged into this room in chains for a crime he didn't commit, surrounded by a Wisengamot that hadn't wanted to hear a defense. 2 boys in the same chair, a generation apart, facing the same institution's casual cruelty. He was not going to let today be a third story of that kind. He was seated in the gallery's front row, which was the closest position to the floor available to a non-participant. Hermione sat beside him with her satchel on her lap, 3 specific legal volumes within immediate reach, notebook open. Neville was on his left, quiet and solid, in formal dark robes that Augusta Longbottom had apparently insisted on when she heard he'd be attending. Andromeda Tonks sat 2 seats further down with her arms folded and the expression of someone who had been waiting for this specific morning for 14 years. The Wisengamot members filled the tiered benches around the room's curved walls, 53 witches and wizards in plum robes who ranged from visibly uncomfortable to carefully neutral to, Harry noted with some satisfaction, 1 or 2 whose expressions suggested they'd been hoping for this for longer than they'd admit. Amelia Bones sat at the front of the left bench, square-jawed, gray-streaked hair, hands on the arms of her chair with the particular stillness of a woman who had already made her decisions and was simply waiting for the room to catch up. Cornelius Fudge sat in the chief interrogator's chair at the bench's head, wearing lime green robes and an expression that moved between irritation and poorly suppressed anxiety. Percy Weasley stood behind him holding a clipboard, looking like a man who wanted to be somewhere else. And at the door, flanked by 2 Aurors, Tonks' colleagues, both of whom Nymphadora had assured Harry were clean, was Sirius. He looked better than he had at Grimmauld Place. He'd had a week's notice, and he'd used it, cleaned up, wore his old robes that still fit him well enough, carried himself with the careful erectness of someone who knew they were being watched and had decided that meant standing straight rather than hunching. But his jaw was tight and his eyes were working the room in the way they always did, cataloging exits, reading faces, 14 years of Azkaban training still running under the surface. He found Harry in the gallery. Something in his face changed, not dramatically, just a small adjustment, like a knot releasing. Harry gave him a single nod. Sirius walked to the chair, sat down, and put his hands on the armrests. The chains didn't move. Fudge cleared his throat and opened the proceedings with the slightly aggressive formality of a man who had been told by multiple barristers that he had no legal choice but to be here and resented every word of that sentence. This hearing has been called, under extraordinary circumstances, regarding the case of Sirius Orion Black, convicted in absentia of, not convicted, said the barrister seated at the floor-level desk to Sirius's left. Harry had retained her 3 days ago on Hermione's recommendation. Callista March, formerly of the Department of Magical Law Enforcement, who had left the ministry 12 years ago over, as she put it in their meeting, a series of profound disagreements about what justice was supposed to look like. She was 60 years old, small, with white hair and the expression of someone who found most legal proceedings beneath her but had made an exception today. My client was never tried, Minister. He was never given the opportunity to enter a plea, never presented with the charges in formal session, never offered counsel. The word convicted is therefore legally inaccurate. A technicality, Fudge began. A foundational principle of wizarding law, March said, with the calm of someone defusing a bomb they'd defused 8 times before. Fudge's mouth tightened. He looked at his notes. This extraordinary hearing has been called under the invocation of, he paused, with the expression of a man who had been told he had to say the words and was deeply unhappy about it, the royal compellence of the heir of Emrys, as filed on July 14th. The legality of said compellence is, not in question, Amelia Bones said. She didn't raise her voice. She simply said it in the tone of a woman who had already had this argument with Fudge 3 times and had run out of patience for it. The legal standing has been reviewed by the department. The compellence is valid. Please continue, Minister. Fudge looked at Bones. Bones looked back at him. The room, Harry observed, was watching this exchange with the attention of people who understood that something had shifted in the political geography of the ministry and were adjusting their mental maps accordingly. Fudge continued. Callista March was, Harry decided within the first 20 minutes, exactly the right person to have in that room. She dismantled the case against Sirius with the methodical precision of someone taking apart a piece of faulty machinery, not dramatically, not with grandstanding, just piece by piece, producing documentation and legal precedent with the efficiency of someone who had spent 12 years preparing for exactly this scenario even before she'd been hired to do it. The evidence log from Sirius's arrest, 17 witnesses, of whom only 2 had actually identified Sirius at the scene. Of those 2, 1 had since died and 1 had, as March produced in written testimony, privately recanted to a Wisengamot member in 1991 and been quietly ignored. The wand examination, Sirius's wand had been confiscated the night of his arrest and never properly examined under the standard detection spells used to identify recent use. March produced the examining Auror's original notation, which stated that the examination had been deemed unnecessary given the confession, and let the Wisengamots sit with that phrase for a moment. The confession, the statement Sirius had allegedly made at the scene, 12 Muggles and Peter, how could I not, which the ministry had treated as an admission of guilt. March presented 2 expert witnesses via written testimony, both legal scholars who had been published in magical jurisprudence journals, arguing that the statement was not an admission, was contextually ambiguous, and had been recorded by a single Auror with no verification. And then, the central piece. The bodies, March said, of the 12 Muggles and the wizard Peter Pettigrew were attributed to Sirius Black based on the physical evidence of the street explosion and the wand confiscation. The investigation was closed within 24 hours of the arrest. She looked up at the Wisengamot. In standard magical forensics, a street explosion of that magnitude requires a significant spell, one that leaves a distinctive magical signature. That signature can be recovered from the scene for up to 72 hours after the event. She paused. No such recovery was performed. When the case was closed, the physical evidence was not fully examined. What we know, from a Gringotts forensic analysis performed this past week using magical residue samples taken from a preserved fragment of the street location, Fudge sat up. A Gringotts forensic, the heir of Emrys requested it under the King's Covenant right of evidence, March said calmly. The Goblin Nation's forensic team has been practicing magical evidence analysis since the 14th century. They are rather better at it than we are. She produced the Gringotts report. It was bound in official black covers with the Goblin seal. She passed it to the Wisengamot clerk, who distributed copies to the senior members. Harry watched the Wisengamots' reading faces. Amelia Bones read steadily and did not react, which Harry interpreted as someone who had already been briefed. 3 members on the left bench went through distinct stages of surprise. An older witch near the back actually looked up at Sirius, then back at the report, and her expression did something complicated. The magical signature of the street explosion, March said, is consistent with a Fidelius charm catastrophic failure combined with a severing spell. Not consistent with a direct offensive spell of the type Sirius Black was alleged to have cast. She let this settle for 3 seconds. The severing spell carries a signature specific to the caster's core resonance. The Gringotts analysis identifies a residual signature inconsistent with Sirius Black's wand signature, which we have on record from his original arrest documentation. Then whose signature? One of the Wisengamot members began. We believe it belongs to Peter Pettigrew, March said. Who is not dead, as the case against my client assumed, but who was an unregistered animagus and faked his own death. The severed finger was left deliberately. The explosion was Pettigrew's own work. She picked up the final document in her stack. We have a statement from a Hogwarts professor, taken this week, who has direct knowledge of Pettigrew's animagus form and his survival. The courtroom went loud. Fudge banged his gavel, which had no effect. The Wizengamot members were talking to each other in urgent undertones, and 3 of them were on their feet. Amelia Bones sat perfectly still in the noise and looked at Sirius, who was gripping the armrests of the chair and staring straight ahead, jaw set, the only fully still person on the floor. Harry leaned close to Hermione. Remus's statement, you confirmed it was properly executed? Witnessed, signed, sealed, and submitted yesterday morning, she said, watching the room with bright eyes. It's bulletproof. He was very thorough. He's been waiting 12 years to say it officially. Yes, she said quietly. He has. It took Fudge 4 minutes to restore anything approaching order, and even then the restored order was approximate, the kind of quiet where people had stopped speaking aloud but were having intense silent conversations with their expressions. He called a 15-minute recess, which Harry took to mean he needed to consult whoever was available and willing to tell him what to do. During the recess, Amelia Bones crossed the courtroom floor, climbed 2 steps of the gallery, and stopped in front of Harry. She looked at him the way she'd been looking at him since the hearing started, with assessment that wasn't unfriendly but was rigorous. The Gringotts forensic analysis, she said. That was your idea. It was the logical tool, Harry said. The Ministry's forensics team would have done the same work in the same time for a fraction of the cost. The Ministry's forensics team answers to the Ministry, Harry said. The Gringotts team answers to the Accord. He paused. It wouldn't have been as unimpeachable. Bones looked at him for a moment. You're 16 years old. 15, Harry said. For another 3 days. Something moved in her expression, not quite a smile, something more controlled, but in the same family. Your legal filing is the most technically correct King's Law invocation I have ever read, she said. I've read 2 others, both historical. Your advisor's work, I assume. We worked on it together. Bones glanced at Hermione, who was watching the exchange with her quill hovering over her notebook, clearly caught between taking notes and trying to appear like she wasn't. Miss Granger, Bones said. Director Bones, Hermione said, carefully professional. The secondary oath houses, Bones said, still looking at Harry. I received your formal request. Yes, Harry said. House Bones will honor the oath, she said, simply and without ceremony. I want that stated before this room renders a verdict, so there is no ambiguity about where my support lies when I cast my vote. She looked at him steadily. I also want it known that I have been attempting to reform the DMLE's relationship with both the Wizengamot and basic legal principle for 11 years. The tools available to me have been inadequate. She paused. They're less inadequate now. I know, Harry said. I was counting on that. Bones looked at him for another moment. Good, she said, and went back to her seat. Neville leaned over and said, very quietly, she's terrifying. She's exactly what we need, Harry said. The verdict, when Fudge delivered it 50 minutes later, was not unanimous but it was decisive, 31-17 in favor of exoneration, with 5 abstentions. The 17 against were the votes Harry had expected, the Malfoy-adjacent bloc, 2 members who voted with Fudge on principle regardless of content, and a handful of others whose positions would need to be addressed in time. But 31 was enough. The chains on Sirius's chair had not moved once during the entire hearing. When March announced the verdict and the Wizengamot clerk read the formal statement of exoneration, they retracted entirely into the chair's arms, as though the chair itself was making a point. Sirius stood up. He didn't look around the room with triumph. He didn't do anything dramatic. He just stood, and his posture was something Harry hadn't seen from him before, not the careful straightness he'd worn coming in, but something more fundamental. The posture of a man who has had something returned to him that he'd spent so long without that he'd forgotten what having it felt like. He walked across the courtroom floor, up the gallery steps, and stopped in front of Harry. "You did this," Sirius said. "The evidence did it," Harry said. "I just made the evidence audible." Sirius looked at him for a moment. His expression was doing several things at once, and none of them were simple, and Harry was glad because simple wouldn't have been true. "Your father," Sirius said finally, roughly, "would have been," he stopped. "Tried again." James would have been insufferably smug about this for at least a week. "I'll settle for a week," Harry said. Sirius laughed. It was the real laugh, not the strained thing he produced at Grimmauld Place, but the one Harry had heard once before, in a shack in the Hogwarts grounds, and had been hoping to hear again. He pulled Harry into a hug that was brief and fierce and said everything that the laugh hadn't covered. Andromeda Tonks, from further down the gallery, made a sound that she would have described as clearing her throat but that no one in the vicinity believed. Lucius Malfoy was waiting in the Ministry atrium. Harry saw him the moment he came through the courtroom doors, the distinctive pale blonde, the formal robes, the silver-handled cane that he carried less for walking and more as an accessory. He was standing near the fountain, not obviously waiting, affecting the posture of a man who happened to be in the area. But his position gave him a direct sightline to the corridor that led from courtroom 10, and that wasn't an accident. Harry walked toward him. Neville fell into step slightly behind and to his right, not obtrusively, just present, the way first defenders apparently learned to be. Hermione was on his left. Sirius, beside Callista March who was efficiently handling his formal release documents, was several paces back. Malfoy watched Harry approach with an expression that was composed and careful and, beneath both of those things, doing something complicated. "Mr. Potter," Malfoy said. His voice was smooth, warm even, the particular warmth of someone who had learned to deploy it as a tool. "I must say, today's proceedings were rather, Lord Malfoy," Harry said, and he said it pleasantly, conversationally, but with the weight of the full portfolio behind it. "I got your letter." Malfoy's expression recalibrated by half a degree. "My letter was simply intended to establish a narrative of institutional authority over the king's claim before I could establish the legal reality," Harry said, still pleasantly. "I know. It was well written. Excellent framing. Wrong on the law, but the framing was very good." He smiled. "I wanted to meet you in person before the Wisengamot session because I think you're intelligent enough that I'd rather you understood my position clearly than spend the next 11 days preparing for a version of me that doesn't exist." Malfoy was quiet for a beat. He was recalibrating more substantially now. Harry could see it. "And what is your position, Mr. Potter?" Harry said. "You can use my name." He watched Malfoy's jaw do something small and tight. "My position is straightforward. I have legal authority that predates every institution in this building. I'm not interested in dismantling those institutions, I'm interested in making them work. The Wisengamot has seats I can fill with people who want good governance. The Ministry has departments that need proper resourcing. I'm not here to burn it down." He paused. "What I am going to do is remove the elements that have been using those institutions to protect themselves instead of the people they're supposed to serve." Malfoy's eyes moved. A quick, controlled assessment, Harry, Neville behind him, Hermione beside him, the folder she was carrying. Then back to Harry. "You speak very confidently," Malfoy said, "for someone who has not yet addressed the Wisengamot." "I practice," Harry said. Then, a fraction quieter, "just direct, I know you're concerned. Reasonably so. The order you've built over 20 years is facing a structural challenge. I understand that's frightening." He held the man's gaze. "What I need you to understand is that what I'm building doesn't require your destruction. It requires your choice." He let this sit for 1 second. "The Wisengamot on the 31st. I'll see you there." He walked past Malfoy toward the atrium's exit, and Neville and Hermione moved with him, and nobody looked back, and behind them the atrium fountain continued its cheerful noise, and Harry heard nothing from Malfoy at all. Which meant he was thinking. Luna arrived at Potter Manor on Thursday morning with a rucksack, a camera, and an envelope of photographs that she presented to Harry over tea with the same manner someone else might use to present a particularly interesting cloud formation. Harry spread the photographs across the study desk. The images were black and white moving prints. Luna's camera was an old magical model, he guessed, and they showed a stone formation in what was clearly Scottish Highland country, 5 standing stones in a rough arc, each one perhaps 8 feet tall, set on a rise with moorland rolling away on 3 sides and the curve of a distant mountain visible on the 4th. Between the stones, the ground was different from the surrounding heath. Darker, smoother, like very old worn stone or something that had been touched by weather and something else, something less meteorological. In one photograph, a hand was pressed flat to the central stone. The hand was Luna's. And around the point of contact, spreading out in the stone's surface like frost forming in reverse, were patterns that Harry recognized. The same patterns as the ring, the basin, the floor of the Gringotts ritual room. It reacted to you, Harry said. Quite strongly, Luna said, with her usual equanimity about remarkable things. It went warm, and then it went very still, and then 3 birds landed on the top stone and stayed there for about an hour. I think they were waiting for someone. Harry looked at the photographs. Luna. When did you find this place? August before last. We were looking for snorkacks. We didn't find any. Well, we found signs, but Dad says signs don't count. But I found the stones. She tilted her head at the photographs. I've been back twice. It's different each time. Quieter now, I think. Like it's saving something. The king's seat, Harry said. Luna looked at him with her wide, serene eyes. Yes, she said, as though this was not news. I thought that's what it was. The trees around it are the oldest magical trees in Britain, you and Rowan and one in the northeast corner that I don't have a name for, that doesn't appear in any botanical catalogue I've checked. It smells like thunder. She sipped her tea. I thought it might be relevant to you. I've been waiting for you to be ready for it to be relevant. Harry looked at her across the desk. Luna, how do you know the things you know? She considered this honestly. I don't think it's that different from how anyone knows anything, she said. I just pay attention to different things. She reached into her rucksack and produced the second item, a folded paper, which she opened flat on the desk. It was a hand-drawn map, accurate, detailed, with compass points and landmarks, the Highland location marked with a small stone symbol and precise coordinates beside it. The man in magical records, Harry said. The one whose shadow falls wrong. Gerald Fitch, Luna said. Except that's not his name. He's been in that department for 9 years. He files things. He's very quiet. But 3 separate requests for historical genealogical records from the past 4 years, requests that would have shown partial confirmation of your bloodline, went to his desk for processing and were never officially filed. The requests are in the incoming log but not the outgoing. Harry looked at her steadily. You checked the ministry's record logs. I have a reader's pass to the ministry archive, Luna said. For the Quibbler. Dad writes articles about ministry transparency. She paused. Nobody ever really checks what I'm looking at. Harry sat back. Gerald Fitch. He wrote the name down. Do you think he's working for Voldemort? I think he's working for someone, Luna said. He takes a particular floor route on Thursdays that goes via an empty property in Wiltshire. She folded her hands on the table. Malfoy Manor is in Wiltshire. Harry added this to his mental map. Malfoy had someone in magical records who had been suppressing genealogical information that might have led to Harry's heritage being discovered earlier. Which meant Malfoy had known, or suspected, something about the king's line for years. Had been quietly managing it. Which meant today in the atrium had not been a chance encounter, and the letter had not been an improvised response to the ritual news. Lucius Malfoy had been preparing for this possibility. Harry felt a new respect for the man, which was not the same as liking him or trusting him, but was its own useful thing. You needed to accurately assess the intelligence of the people working against you. How did you get all this information? Hermione said. She'd appeared in the study doorway. She'd been in the library for the past hour and looked like she'd surfaced from somewhere interesting. She was looking at Luna with the expression she wore when she encountered something that didn't fit her existing framework and was rapidly reconstructing the framework. I've been paying attention for a long time, Luna said simply. I find that if you seem strange enough, people say things in front of you they wouldn't say in front of someone sensible. She looked at Hermione thoughtfully. Also, I'm better at research than most people assume. I've had rather a lot of practice. Hermione sat down. After a moment she said, you should be at the Wysengamacht session. I was hoping to be invited, Luna said. I have more photographs. The letter from the Unspeakables arrived that Friday, 7 days after the first one. Same route, Goblin Liaison, no name. Different handwriting this time, slightly smaller and more controlled. 3 paragraphs, each one dense with information. The Horcrux in your scar can be dissolved without destroying you. The King's Compact creates a magical resonance in you that is antithetical to the severed soul fragment. At the King's seat, with the full claim activated, the resonance will intensify to the point where the fragment cannot maintain its binding. It will simply unmoor. The fragment dissipates. You do not. We have been testing this theory for 2 years on soul fragment samples. The results are consistent. We need you to know that we have no official sanction for this research and cannot provide public testimony without ending our careers. But the work is real and the method is sound. There is a second Horcrux we believe has been destroyed already, the diary. There are 4 remaining besides yours. We know the locations of 3. The 4th is more difficult. We can meet and share what we have. The Goblin Liaison is secure. Use it to set a time. Harry read it to Hermione and Neville in the study, then folded it and placed it in the portfolio. The silence lasted for about 10 seconds. 4 remaining, Neville said. One of which dissolves when I claim the seat, Harry said. Which means 3 to find and destroy before I confront him. The Unspeakables know 3 locations, Hermione said. She was already writing. That means the Order's existing intelligence plus this gets us to, she was doing arithmetic, potentially all 4 if we combine what we have. I need to meet them, Harry said. Before the Wysengamacht session. He looked at Neville. And I need to go to Scotland. When? Neville said. The 28th. 3 days before the session. He looked at the map Luna had left on the desk. I need the seat confirmed before I walk into that room. Not for the legal standing, that's already established. But for, he paused, finding the right word, for what I actually am. Neville nodded once, no hesitation. I'll be there. Me too, Hermione said, without looking up from her notebook. Harry looked at the ring. In the afternoon light of the study, the amber stone was a warm, steady gold. He pressed his thumb to it briefly, not to enter the archive, just as a reflex, a check, the way you'd feel for a key in your pocket. The stone pulsed once, warm and certain. Outside, somewhere over the manor's grounds, the first clouds of a building summer storm were coming in from the west, rolling across the sky with the particular gravity of British weather, dramatic and unhurried, the kind that meant something was coming and had all the time in the world to arrive. Harry watched them from the window for a moment. He thought about Voldemort. He thought about the frequency, the presence at the edge of the signal, and what it had been doing since the serious hearing. He'd felt it shift, a quality of heightened attention, like something turning to face a new direction. Voldemort knew something had changed. He could feel the difference in Harry the same way Harry could feel the difference in the air before a storm. Let him feel it, Harry thought. Let him feel that the thing he'd spent 15 years planning around was standing at the window of its ancestral house wearing his grandfather's ring, looking at weather coming in from the west and planning 3 things simultaneously and not frightened of any of them. He turned from the window. "Right," he said. "Let's talk about the 3 Horcrux locations the unspeakables have." Chapter 5, Blood and Marble. The Cairngorms were nothing like Harry had imagined. He'd pictured Scotland in the abstract, grey, dramatic, the kind of landscape that appeared in the background of old paintings. What he walked into on the morning of July 28 was something else entirely. The light was wrong for any painting he'd ever seen, clear and particular, neither warm nor cold, the kind of light that made things look exactly like themselves without flattery or shadow. The moorland stretched in every direction with the absolute confidence of something that had been here long before anyone thought to name it and would be here long after. They'd apparat to the nearest safe point, a farm track 3 miles south, and walked the rest. Hermione had the map. Neville had a pack with supplies and the kind of quiet readiness that Harry had come to think of as simply Neville's register for anything that mattered. The morning air smelled like peat and something green and, faintly, as they climbed the last rise toward the coordinates on Luna's map, like thunder, exactly as Luna had said. Harry smelled the thunder before he saw the stones. Then the rise crested and there they were. 5 standing stones in a rough arc, just as the photographs had shown, but photographs had not caught the scale. Each stone was taller than 8 feet, broader than he'd thought, and darker, not grey as moorland stone usually was but a deep near-black that seemed to pull the morning light into itself rather than reflect it. Between them, the ground was the color of deep water, smooth and worn and radiating something that Harry felt in his chest the moment he stepped onto the rise. Not magical pressure exactly. Something older. Something that knew him. The 4 symbols on the ring flared warm the moment he crossed onto the rise's flat top. "There," Hermione said softly, and pointed to the central stone, which was fractionally taller than the others and set apart from the arc by perhaps 5 feet. Neville was looking around the perimeter, not at the stones but at the landscape beyond them. "The trees Luna mentioned," he said. Harry looked. The trees were there, low, wind-shaped, growing at odd angles but with root systems that spread wide and deep, visibly old in the way the stones were old. Yew on the south side, dark and steady. Rowan to the west with its late berries just beginning. And in the northeast corner, one tree that Harry had no name for, silver-barked, narrow, with leaves that were a green so dark they were almost black, and when the wind moved through them they made a sound that was somewhere between a sigh and a word. "Right," Harry said. He looked at the central stone. "I need to do this part alone." Neither Hermione nor Neville argued, which he appreciated. Hermione sat on a flat stone near the ark's edge and opened her notebook, taking notes on what she could observe, because Hermione processed significant moments through documentation. Neville positioned himself at the rise's crest, facing outward, one hand on his wand, watching the moorland. First defender. Harry walked to the central stone. Up close it was even darker, the surface worn smooth except for the bottom 2 feet where the carving was, deep lines, old work, the same 4 symbols from the ring but larger, and beneath them something older still, characters Harry's rational mind didn't recognize but some other part of him read without difficulty. He stood before the stone and pressed his right palm flat against it. The reaction was not gradual. The symbols on the stone's surface lit at the moment of contact, gold first, the same gold as the basin, spreading outward from his palm in every direction across the stone's face. The other 4 stones responded in sequence, left to right, each one brightening as the light reached it through the ground, through the roots of the ancient trees, through whatever was in the earth here that connected one stone to the next. The ground beneath his feet went warm. The 4 symbols on the ring burned bright and steady, and the amber stone at its center blazed like something that had been waiting for exactly this and was profoundly relieved. Harry felt the Horcrux. He'd always known it was there, in the abstract. Dumbledore had confirmed it, the unspeakables had confirmed it, Fleamont had explained its nature in the archive with careful precision. But he'd never felt it as a distinct thing, a separate presence. Now, with the king's seat active and the claim burning through him from the stone's surface, he felt it clearly, cold, sharp, deeply wrong, a piece of something that hated everything the light around him was. It sat behind his scar like a splinter, and the resonance from the stone was pulling at it the way a tide pulled at something caught on a rock. Harry pressed harder against the stone and thought, clearly and deliberately, I claim this land. I claim this seat. I am the heir of Emrys and I am standing where I'm supposed to stand. The ground shook. Not violently, a deep, slow pulse, like a single heartbeat from something enormous and patient. The trees moved in a wind that Harry couldn't feel on his face. The birds that had been quiet in the branches rose all at once, wheeled once overhead, and landed again in perfect silence. And the Horcrux, the cold, wrong, foreign thing behind his scar, came loose. It was not painful in the way Harry had anticipated. It was more like a tooth being drawn cleanly by someone who knew exactly what they were doing: pressure, resistance, release. The cold thing contracted, struggling against the resonance, and Harry held steady against the stone and let the seat's magic do what it was built for. 3 seconds that felt like 30, and then something went out of him like a candle flame in a breeze, simply not there anymore, where it had always been before. His scar, for the first time in 15 years, did not hurt. He stood at the stone for a long moment, hands still flat against it, breathing. The gold light was fading slowly, unhurried, settling back into the engravings. The warmth remained in the ground. He felt entirely himself. It was a strange sensation, to feel entirely yourself after a lifetime of having something else in the room. He turned. Hermione was standing. She'd abandoned her notebook somewhere. She was watching him with an expression that said she'd seen more from the ark's edge than he'd expected. Neville had turned from the perimeter and was looking at him with something steady and direct in his face. Done. Neville said. Done, Harry said. The scar. Harry touched it. Nothing. Not the familiar phantom ache, not the low-level wrongness he'd been so used to he'd stopped registering it as unusual. Gone. Hermione let out a long breath that was very controlled but still audible. She picked up her notebook, opened it, and wrote 2 words. Harry couldn't read them from where he stood, but he suspected one of them was confirmed. There's something else, Harry said. He looked at the central stone. The light had fully settled now, but the stone was different than it had been when he arrived, more present, somehow, as though whatever dormancy had been on it had fully lifted. Stand back. He walked to the stone again, placed his palm flat against it again, and this time thought something different. The stone opened. Not literally, it didn't split or crumble. But a recess appeared in its face, revealed rather than created, as though the stone had always had this hollow and was simply showing it now. Inside was a flat package wrapped in oilskin, preserved by whatever enchantments protected this place from time and weather. Harry took it. He unwrapped it carefully. Inside the oilskin was a flat case of the same dark wood as the box in Gringotts, and inside the case, on black velvet, was a second ring. Simpler than the one he wore, plain gold, no stone, a single symbol on the outer face. He didn't know the symbol, but the ring knew him. The moment he held it, it warmed, and the symbol on its face lit briefly gold before settling. On the inside of the case's lid, scratched into the wood in handwriting that matched the letter in his vault, "For the one you trust to stand at your left." Harry looked at the ring for a moment. Then he looked at Hermione. She was watching him with her notebook lowered, her expression having done something careful and complicated. He crossed the ground between them and held the case out to her. She looked at the ring. Then at him. "Harry, it's not romantic," he said quickly, which made Neville make a muffled sound behind him. "Or, I don't know what it is, exactly. I found a note in the vault that said for the one you trust to stand at your left, and that's you. That's been you since we were 11. He paused. "You don't have to." Hermione took the ring out of the case. She examined it with the focused attention she gave all significant things, turning it carefully, reading the symbol on the face. Then she put it on her left hand, middle finger. Nothing dramatic happened. The symbol glowed once. The ring settled. "What does it do?" she said. "I don't know exactly," Harry said. "Protection, I think. And connection." Fleamont mentioned something about the council bond in one of the archive sessions. "The person who stands at the king's left has a line of direct communication that can't be blocked or intercepted." He paused. "It also apparently confers standing in the Wisengamot that no one can challenge procedurally." Hermione looked at the ring on her finger for a moment. Then she looked up at him with an expression that was warm and exasperated and decided all at once. "You could have led with the Wisengamot standing," she said. "I could have," Harry agreed. She laughed, a real one, surprised out of her, and turned back to her notebook. They were back at Potter Manor by early afternoon, and the unspeakables were already there. Harry had not known they were coming today specifically. The message through the Goblin liaison had confirmed a meeting before the Wisengamot session, but not an exact time. He walked through the manor's front door to find Creature standing in the entry hall with the expression of someone who had been managing unexpected guests and had opinions about it, and 3 people in the drawing room who stood up when he entered. 2 women and a man, all in their 30s or 40s, all in unremarkable ministry grey robes that had been deliberately stripped of any identifying insignia. The woman closest to him had dark auburn hair and the eyes of someone who had spent years looking at things most people didn't know existed. The man beside her was compact and precise, the kind of build that suggested he'd been athletic once and had redirected the energy into focus. The third, standing slightly apart near the window, was watching Harry with the combination of assessment and recognition that people showed when they'd spent a long time thinking about someone and were now face to face with them. "Mr. Potter," the auburn-haired woman said. "I'm sorry for the unannounced timing. The communication channels we have available are limited." "It's fine," Harry said. He looked at the 3 of them. "You wrote to me twice." "I wrote to you once," the woman said. "My colleague wrote the second letter." She indicated the compact man. "The third of us," she nodded toward the window, "prefers to listen before speaking." "Names?" Harry said. "For now," the man said, carefully, "we'd prefer not." "Understood." Harry sat. The 3 unspeakables sat across from him. Neville positioned himself near the door. Hermione came in from behind Harry and sat beside him, notebook already open. "The Horcrux in my scar," Harry said. "It's gone." The room went briefly, sharply still. "You went to the seat," the auburn-haired woman said. "This morning." The 3 unspeakables looked at each other. The woman at the window said, quietly, her first words, "He actually did it in the right order." "You sound surprised," Harry said. "We didn't know if the timing would work out," the compact man said. He was reaching into his case. "We have the documentation on the remaining Horcruxes. 3 locations confirmed, 1 theory." He placed 3 folders on the table. "Hufflepuff's cup is in Gringotts. Bellatrix Lestrange's vault." "That's going to be complicated," Hermione said. "Ragnarok," Harry said. "It's in the Goblin Nation's territory." Different conversation. He looked at the second folder. "Slytherin's locket," the compact man said. "Currently in Grimmauld Place." He paused. "Number 12, specifically." "It was recovered from the Black family collection. It's been sitting in a display case in the first-floor drawing room for, we believe, approximately 15 years. Harry thought about all the times he'd been in Grimmauld Place. Creature, hoarding Black family heirlooms. Creature, he said. The old house elf appeared in the doorway immediately, which suggested he'd been nearby. Master? The locket, Harry said. Slytherin's locket. Gold, serpents, won't open. Creature, where is it? Creature's expression did something that moved through guilty, defensive, and then, in the face of Harry's steady look, settled into something resigned. He disappeared and reappeared 40 seconds later holding a gold locket that Harry recognized immediately, heavy, ornate, the S in serpents on its face unmistakably Slytherin design. "Is it safe to have it in the room?" Hermione said, looking at it with the careful attention of someone who had read extensively about dark artifacts. "The seat's claim is active," the woman at the window said. "Horcrux magic has diminished reach in proximity to the confirmed heir right now. We've theorized about this but never had the opportunity to." She stopped herself, pulled back to practical. "It won't act on anyone in this room." Harry looked at the locket. Creature was holding it with both hands, his ancient face doing something complicated. Harry thought about Regulus Black, who had died trying to destroy this thing, who had sent Creature on an errand that no one should have survived and who had spent the last moments of his life trying to undo his master's worst choices. "Creature," Harry said. "Regulus died trying to destroy this. We're going to finish what he started." He looked at the house elf steadily. "You helped him. What he did was brave. He deserves to be remembered for it." Creature went very still. Something moved in his face, very old, very deep, the expression of someone who had been carrying something for a long time and had been given, unexpectedly, permission to put it down. "Creature knows," the old elf said, his voice lower than usual. He placed the locket on the table between Harry and the unspeakables, stepped back, and stood straight. "The destruction method?" Harry said to the unspeakables. "Basilisk venom is confirmed effective," the compact man said. "Or fiend fire. We have a third method in the documentation, the sword." "Gryffindor's sword," Harry said. "Any sword that has been impregnated with basilisk venom would work. Gryffindor's sword famously was, in 1992. The man looked at Harry with an expression that suggested he knew exactly how it had been impregnated. "You've used it before." "I'll retrieve it from the vault tonight," Harry said. He looked at the third folder. "The third location. Ravenclaw's diadem," the auburn woman said. "In Hogwarts. Room of requirement." Harry thought about the 7th floor corridor, the tapestry, the door that appeared when you needed it. He'd been in and out of the room of requirement for DA meetings for a full year. He'd walked past a Horcrux 100 times in a room full of students. And the fourth? The theory? The three unspeakables looked at each other. "Nagini," the compact man said. "Voldemort's snake. We believe she's been made into a Horcrux." The room was quiet for a moment. "The last one," Harry said. "Yes. Destroying the other four removes his safety nets. Nagini is the final one he'd protect most closely, which means she's the last." He paused. "It also means she'd need to be destroyed in direct confrontation, most likely." "I know," Harry said. He looked at the 3 folders, then at the ring on his hand. "The cup is the most complicated logistically, but Ragnarok will be the key. The locket I can deal with tonight. The diadem before the Wisengamot session, I'll go to Hogwarts." He looked up. "The diadem is on a broken statue in the room. I've walked past it. I know exactly where it is." Hermione looked at him. "How do you know that?" "Ravenclaw inheritance," Harry said simply. "The memory archive. I accessed the founder's memories 2 nights ago." He looked at her. Rowena Ravenclaw remembered every object she made. The memory of the diadem's placement is very clear. The woman at the window was watching him with an expression that was no longer assessment. "You accessed a founder's memory." "My ancestor," Harry said. "The archive is extensive." She leaned forward slightly. "I've spent 9 years studying magical heritage science. What you've done in 3 weeks, what the blood carries, I need you to know that we will document everything we can from our side when this is over." She paused. "For the record." "When this is over," Harry said, "we can talk about what the record looks like and who has access to it." He looked at all 3 of them. "I need your names before the Wisengamot session." The 3 looked at each other. The woman at the window spoke first. "Elara," she said. "That's enough for now." The auburn woman, Maris. The compact man, Thomas. "Elara, Maris, Thomas," Harry said. "I'll see you after the 31st. The locket was destroyed that evening in the study, with Gryffindor's sword retrieved from the vault, the dark steel blade that had been waiting on its iron stand since the morning Harry had first seen it, which now came off the stand and into his hand with the absolute ease of something that had been made for exactly this purpose. When the blade opened the locket, the thing that came out of it was not pleasant. A shadow of something cold and screaming that spoke in a voice Harry recognized, tried fear first and then rage, said things designed to cut, about his parents, his worth, his blood, the futility of everything he was doing. Harry listened to it for approximately 4 seconds, long enough to confirm it was exactly what he expected, then destroyed it. The shadow collapsed. The room went quiet. The locket was inert metal on the study floor. Neville, who had watched with his wand out the whole time, let out a slow breath. "I always imagined that would be more dramatic." "It tries to use what you're afraid of," Harry said, cleaning the blade. "The things it used on me tonight weren't very frightening." He looked at the locket's remains. 2 down. "The diadem tomorrow," Hermione said. "Tomorrow morning," Harry said. "Before the Wisengamot session in the afternoon." "Yes." He retrieved the diadem from Hogwarts at 9 the next morning, with the castle empty of students on summer break and McGonagall meeting him at the gates with the expression of someone who had received his letter, understood its implications, and had several things to say, none of which were small talk. She walked him to the 7th floor in silence that was its own kind of conversation, the specific silence of a woman reassessing something she thought she understood. "The room knows you," she said, at the tapestry corridor, watching the door appear at Harry's thought. "The castle knows me," Harry said. "Gryffindor blood." He paused, hand on the door. "I'll be 10 minutes. He was 8. The diadem was where the Ravenclaw memory said it would be, on the bust of an ugly warlock in the middle of the room's vast junk-heap cavern. He took it, wrapped it in the cloth he'd brought, and brought it out. McGonagall looked at the wrapped parcel. "You're really going to do this," she said. "Not a question. Not doubt. Something more like someone adjusting the last piece of a mental picture into place." "I've been doing it for 2 weeks," Harry said. "Today's the formal bit." "The Wisengamot," she began. "If you want to be there," Harry said, "there are gallery seats available. Hermione has the list." He looked at her. "I'd like you there, Professor. You've spent 30 years watching this institution make poor decisions. I think you deserve to watch it do something different." McGonagall looked at him for a long moment. The morning light through the corridor windows was gold and dusty, and she stood in it with the particular straight-backed dignity that was so specifically her. "I will be there," she said. The diadem was destroyed in the Hogwarts grounds, well clear of the building, with the sword and the crisp certainty of a morning that felt like it was trying to cooperate. 3 down. The Ministry was not prepared for what arrived at 2 o'clock. Harry walked into the Wisengamot chamber through the main entrance, not the side door that visitors typically used, because there was no reason to use the side door. He wore formal black robes, not the Hogwarts kind but the ancient kind, the kind that bore the Potter seal and the Peveril crest worked in the fabric, pulled from the manor's wardrobe where they'd been waiting since his grandfather's time. The ring was on his right hand. Neville walked at his right shoulder in formal Longbottom grey. Hermione was at his left, her own ring on her hand, her leather satchel across her shoulder, notebook inside. Behind them, Sirius, formally exonerated and impeccably dressed, who had appointed himself to this role with exactly no one's permission. Andromeda Tonks. Amelia Bones, who had walked the last 100 feet of corridor with them with the deliberate precision of someone making a public statement. Lord Abbot and Lord Davis from the allied houses. And, at the back, Minerva McGonagall, who walked into the Wisengamot chamber like she owned the building and found its current tenants lacking. The chamber seated 200. It was full. The word had spread, as words of this magnitude did, through every channel available to a community that still relied heavily on outpost and person-to-person gossip. Every senior Wisengamot member was present. The gallery was packed with observers, journalists, ministry officials, members of various houses who hadn't been formally invited but hadn't not been invited either. Harry recognized faces he knew and faces he didn't, prominent and ordinary, and he scanned the gallery quickly as he took his position. Lucius Malfoy was in the senior members' bench. Dressed formally, posture perfect, expression neutral with a very expensive control. His eyes found Harry the moment Harry entered the chamber. The contact lasted 3 seconds and then Malfoy looked at the chamber's head, where Fudge was already in the chief warlock's chair looking like a man sitting on a hot stove. Harry walked to the speaker's floor and stood. "The session," said the Wisengamot clerk, a spare woman with reading glasses, in a slightly strangled tone that suggested she had not expected the gallery to be this full, "will come to order." Fudge cleared his throat. "This extraordinary session has been called at the request of," he paused, audibly, "at the request of Harry Potter, who has filed a formal address request under the King's Covenant right of address," Harry said, clearly, into the chamber. He didn't have a podium. He stood on the speaker's floor in the center of the room and spoke to all of it at once. Which predates the Wisengamot's own procedural rules and does not require the chief warlock's endorsement to be valid. He looked up at Fudge with exactly the amount of deference owed to a man who had been told by his own department that he had no authority to block this and hadn't taken it well. "But I appreciate the introduction, Minister." There was a sound from the gallery that was very close to a laugh. Fudge's face went the particular shade that Harry had come to think of as official Fudge distress. He waved a hand that was meant to signal proceed and managed mostly to signal discomfort. Harry looked at the assembled Wisengamot. 53 members. He knew all of their positions now. Hermione had done a full analysis, house by house, covenant by covenant, known Malfoy affiliations, known sympathies. He knew which of them were already in his column and which were persuadable and which would need the formal legal weight to shift them. "I'm going to keep this straightforward," Harry said. "Because the facts are straightforward, even if the implications are large." He produced the Gringotts document, the Basin record, the confirmed bloodlines, Ragnarok's witness seal, and passed it to the clerk, who would distribute copies to the senior members. "I am the confirmed heir of the houses of Potter, Peverell, Gryffindor, Ravenclaw, Slytherin, and Merlin. I am the direct descent of the line of Emrys, confirmed by the ancestral ritual at Gringotts on July 31st, by the Goblin Nation's formal accord under the Goblin Accord of 1347, and by the King's seat in the Cairngorms, which activated at my claim 4 days ago." He paused. "The King's Covenant has not been dissolved. The royal authority has not been transferred to any other institution by any legal mechanism that exists in magical British law. It has been dormant. It is no longer dormant." The chamber was very quiet. "I'm not here to dismantle the Wisengamot," Harry said, because the faces in front of him needed to hear this clearly. "This institution has been the structure of magical governance for 300 years and the majority of the people in it serve it honestly. I'm here because there is a war, and the war is not being won, and the reason it is not being won is that the legal structures designed to fight it have been compromised from inside." He let this land for exactly 1 second. "I invoke King's law to call a formal accounting. Not a trial. Not a censure. A reckoning. The kind that lets this institution choose what it wants to be going forward." "This is absurd," said a voice from the senior bench. Thaddeus Whittle, who Harry had noted as a Malfoy-adjacent vote that was more comfort than conviction. "A schoolboy walks in here with a piece of parchment from the goblins and 17 confirmed Wisengamot votes in standing accord with the royal claim," Hermione said from Harry's left, clearly and without raising her voice. "With a further 6 secondary oath houses awaiting formal confirmation. That is a Wisengamot majority, Mr. Whittle, and it predates your objection by 3,000 years of magical covenant law." Whittle stared at her. "My advisor," Harry said. Lucius Malfoy spoke for the first time. He rose from his seat, proper procedure, acknowledged by the clerk, and when he spoke his voice was exactly what Harry expected, measured, intelligent, calibrated. "The Wisengamot respects history," Malfoy said. "We respect lineage and covenant. These are not values I would dispute." He looked at Harry directly. "But the precedents you invoke, Mr. Potter, are centuries dormant, and a dormant system applied abruptly to an active political situation creates instability rather than order. I would ask the chamber to consider, carefully, whether this is truly the moment to be, Lord Malfoy," Harry said. Malfoy stopped. Not because he'd been shouted at or interrupted dramatically. Harry had said the name at the same conversational volume he'd used for everything else, but something in the quality of it moved through the chamber like a shift in temperature. "You've had someone in the Magical Records Department suppressing genealogical filings pertaining to my bloodline for 4 years, Harry said. "Gerald Fitch. He takes a flu via Wiltshire on Thursdays." He watched Malfoy's face with complete attention. "I know you're smart enough to have prepared for this moment, and I know you've been preparing for it for longer than most people realize, which is why I told you last week that what I'm building doesn't require your destruction." He held the older man's gaze. "But I need you to understand that the information I just shared, which is in a full documentation file that will be submitted to Director Bones this afternoon, means that your position here today is not one of legal objection. It is one of choice." He paused. "Make a good one." The silence in the chamber was the kind that happened when a room full of people were all having their own private reckoning simultaneously. Malfoy sat down. Not in defeat, Harry watched him sit and knew the man wasn't broken, wasn't done, wasn't anything other than recalculating. But he sat, and the sitting meant something, and everyone in the room read it. And then the ground shook. Not a tremor, not a building fault. The chamber floor pulsed once, deep and resonant, the same heartbeat pulse Harry had felt in the Cairngorms. The magical core of the building, the old stone of the ministry, built on earth that had been enchanted since before anyone living could remember, responded to the activated claim the way the stones in Scotland had responded. Every candle in the chamber blazed briefly brighter. Every enchanted window showed, for 2 seconds, an image of open sky. Then it settled. The chamber was breathlessly quiet. An older witch in the second tier, Lady Marchbanks, who had been a Hogwarts examiner since before Harry was born and whose expression had been carefully neutral since the session began, stood. She used proper procedural form, the clerk acknowledged her, and when she spoke her voice was clear and completely without drama. "I have been in this chamber for 41 years, she said. "I have not seen it do that for a living person since the documentation records of 1534. She looked at Harry. The land recognized him. "I watched it. Whatever else is debated today," she looked around the chamber, "that is not a debatable thing." Hermione, beside Harry, made a small sound that was absolutely not a triumphant exhale and was completely that. Dumbledore arrived at 3:30. He had not been on Harry's list of invited attendees, but he had not been excluded either, and he walked into the gallery when the session was in its 3rd hour, during the procedural portion where Hermione was walking 3 Wisengamot members through the specific covenant language binding their houses to the King's Accord. He sat in the gallery's upper tier and said nothing and watched. At the session's close, when the formal vote on recognition of the royal claim passed 37-9, with 7 abstentions, and the clerk read the result in the particular flat tone of someone reading a historical document while it was still being written, Harry looked up at the gallery and found Dumbledore's eyes. The old man's expression was what Harry had seen in the kitchen at Grimmauld Place, that complicated, quiet thing that was proud and pained and genuine. He inclined his head once, a full and deliberate acknowledgement. Harry nodded back. Then he turned to Hermione, who was already drafting the formal record, and Neville, who looked like a man who had placed a bet on himself and won, and Amelia Bones, who was already moving toward him with the expression of someone who had a list and was ready to begin. The work, he knew, had barely started. 3 Horcruxes left to account for, in some form. Nagini and Voldemort beyond that. A ministry that had recognized the claim but would need steady hands on the wheel for years to get to something that actually worked. Lucius Malfoy, sitting in the senior bench reading his copy of the Gringotts document with the focused attention of someone studying a problem he hadn't abandoned, merely deferred. But 37-9. And the ground had moved. Harry stood in the center of the Wizengamot chamber while the room reorganized itself around this new reality, and he thought about a letter that began, "If you are reading this, the blood held," and thought, it held. Then Bones reached him, list in hand, and the next thing began. Chapter 6, The King Remembers. The message came through the link at 3 in the morning on August 4th. Harry was in the archive when he felt it, not from Fleamont's side, not through the ring, but through that other frequency, the one that had been running under everything like a bass note since the Cairngorms. The Horcrux was gone, but the ancestral Slytherin connection remained, the old blood tie between his line and Voldemort's stolen fragment, and through it Harry felt something that he'd felt once before, in the graveyard 3 years ago. Voldemort was done waiting. He surfaced from the archive into the dark of the study, the fire burned low, the ring warm on his hand. He sat for a moment with the quality of the signal, reading it the way you'd read weather. Not panic, not strategy, something colder. Decision. The particular stillness of a man who has run out of patience and made a choice. Harry picked up his quill and wrote 3 words on a piece of parchment, then went to the window and sent it with Hedwig, "Tonight. He moves." He sent copies to Neville, Hermione, Sirius, Tonks, and Amelia Bones. Then he put his quill down, looked at the fire for a moment, and went back into the archive. Fleamont was already standing when Harry arrived, which hadn't happened before. The archive library was the same as always, amber light, old stone, the shelves of preserved memories reaching floor to ceiling, but Fleamont was on his feet near the fireplace, and his expression was the one Harry had learned to read as important, now. "You felt him," Fleamont said. "Moving tonight." "Where?" "I don't know yet. He'll show me." Harry sat, because thinking was easier sitting. "He's coming for me publicly. He's been watching the Wizengamot session, watching the seat, watching the claim build, and he's decided that moving against me now, before the legal structure fully consolidates, is his best option." Harry looked at the fire. "He thinks political exposure makes me vulnerable. That I'll be careful about collateral damage. Will you?" "I'll be precise," Harry said. "Different thing." Fleamont looked at him for a long moment. "The sword is in the study?" "Since the locket." "Good." Fleamont moved to the chair and sat, leaning forward. "There's something in the archive you haven't accessed yet. I've been waiting until you needed it rather than simply knowing it." He held Harry's eyes. "The Emery's battle knowledge. The full ancestral combat inheritance from the king's line." He paused. "It's not spells. It's something older than spells. You'll recognize it when it activates. It feels like remembering something you never consciously learned." "How does it activate?" "Need," Fleamont said simply. "When you're in it, when everything else is moving and the stakes are real, the blood answers." He paused. "Harry. I need you to understand something about Voldemort before you face him tonight. Tell me." He has believed, for 25 years, that he was the most powerful magical being in Britain. That belief is load-bearing in his psychology. It is not vanity, he has good evidence for it, or he had good evidence until 3 weeks ago. Fleamont looked at him steadily. "Tonight you are showing him something he has never had to contend with. Not another powerful wizard. Not a weapon or a prophecy child. The land itself has moved against him. He cannot process that as a fair contest." He paused. "This means he will not fight fairly." "I know. I mean he will not fight in the way you expect. He won't come alone. He won't come direct." Fleamont looked at the fire. "The snake will be with him. And he will use the people around you as leverage if he can." Harry thought about the 5 Horcrux problem, now 3. The cup was still in Bellatrix's vault, Ragnarok had been contacted and the retrieval was scheduled for August 6, 2 days away. The diadem was already destroyed. 3 remaining, Cup, Nagini, and the unknown fourth the unspeakables had called a theory. He'd been wrong about the fourth. He'd worked it out 2 days after the Wisengamot session, sitting in the study with the Ravenclaw inheritance sharpening his analytical instincts and the Slytherin connection giving him something more personal than that. The fourth Horcrux was something he should have guessed earlier and might have, if he'd been looking from the right angle. Voldemort's wand. Not confirmed, not documented, but the logic was clean. When Voldemort had been preparing for his return, before the diary, before the systematic Horcrux creation, he had put a piece of his soul into the one object he trusted most absolutely. Harry had run the theory past Maris, the auburn-haired unspeakable, who had been silent for 30 seconds and then said that would explain certain anomalies in the resurrection ritual with the tone of someone fitting the last piece into a puzzle they'd been working for years. The wand would need the sword. And the sword would need him to be close enough to Voldemort to use it. Which meant tonight, if Voldemort was coming, was the opportunity that all the preparation had been building toward. Harry stood. "I need an hour," he said. Fleamont looked at him. "The archive will be here." "I know." Harry looked at his grandfather, the red-haired man in the armchair, the face so familiar in structure and so unmet in reality, the expression that had shifted over 4 weeks of visits from reserved pride into something warmer and more honest. "I'll come back after." "I know you will," Fleamont said quietly. Harry surfaced. The others arrived at Potter Manor by 5 in the morning. Hermione first, arriving through the flue with her satchel and a look that said she'd been awake since his message arrived and had spent the hours productively. Neville came 5 minutes behind her, and Harry noticed with a small private satisfaction that he'd brought the book he'd gifted, 1200 Uses of Magical Plants in Ritual and Combat, Chapter 7, and had 2 pages marked with his thumb. Sirius came last, through the front door with Tonks, both of them in practical dark robes. Sirius's eyes were clear and alert in a way that Harry had not seen from him in any of the years they'd known each other, the look of a man operating at full capacity for the first time in a very long time, all of it pointed in one direction. "He's coming here," Sirius said, the moment he walked in. "Not necessarily here," Harry said. "But he's moving toward me. He'll want a location that has meaning, the symbolism matters to him." Harry thought about Voldemort's psychology, the love of gesture, the dramatic instinct wrapped around the genuine power. He'll know about the Wisengamot session. He'll know about the seat. The ancestral manor of the House of Potter, freshly reclaimed and activated, that's the kind of location he'd choose. "You're telling me," Sirius said, "that you think he's coming here?" "I think there's a reasonable chance." Harry looked at him. "Which is why you're all here." "We could move the fight," Hermione said. She was at the desk, a set of notes already open. "Choose a location that's more defensible, that we control fully." "We do control this location fully," Harry said. "The blood wards here are as old as the king's seat. Voldemort's magic doesn't function at full strength within the manor's grounds, same principle as the seat, the claim is active and the land knows it." He looked at the ring. "He can still come in. The wards don't prevent entry. But they constrain him. He'll be working at a disadvantage he isn't aware of." Hermione wrote this down. "The snake," Neville said. He had Chapter 7 open on the desk and was reading a particular passage with focused attention. "Nagini. She'll be with him." "She has to be," Harry said. "She's a Horcrux. He won't let her out of range." "Then she needs to be separated from him quickly," Neville said. He turned the book so Harry could see the page. Venomous Tentacula Extract, Chapter 7. Applied as a barrier enchantment rather than a direct contact agent, creates a zone that serpentine magical creatures avoid instinctively. It's not a combat spell, it's a property of the plant's defensive secretions. He looked up. "I've been working on the application method. I think I can cast it as a perimeter line." Harry looked at the passage, then at Neville. "You've been preparing this specifically." "Since you said tonight might happen," Neville said. "Yeah. How confident are you in the application?" Completely, Neville said, with the simple certainty of someone operating in their area of actual expertise. Sirius was looking at Neville with an expression that was warmly startled, as though he'd been tracking a person for a while and they just revealed an unexpected depth. Merlin's teeth, he said quietly. When did you? 5th year, Neville said, without looking up from the book. Approximately when I decided being scared of everything was more expensive than the alternative. Harry looked at his people. Neville with his plant knowledge and his steady hands and a kind of courage that didn't need an audience. Hermione with her legal mind and her rings and the 3 books she'd already cross-referenced in the last 20 minutes. Sirius, clear-eyed and present and alive in a way he hadn't been for years. Tonks, who had her aura training and a flexibility of response that no Death Eater was going to expect. All of them here, all of them chosen, not by prophecy, not by blood covenant or institutional obligation but by the simple fact of who they were and what they'd decided mattered. Here's what we're doing, Harry said. They had 4 hours. Hermione and Tonks worked the perimeter together, not defensive wards, which Voldemort's level of power would simply break through, but strategic wards, the kind that channeled movement and constrained approach angles. They'd been discussing magical architecture for an hour by the time the sun was fully up, moving through the manor's grounds with a precision that looked like a casual walk to anyone watching from outside. Neville spent an hour in the walled garden. Harry didn't ask exactly what he was doing, the focused efficiency was its own answer. Sirius, who had declined to be given a specific task with the polite firmness of a man who had been sidelined for 14 years and was done with it, instead spent the 4 hours doing what Sirius did best, moving through the manor, checking every approach, applying 3 specific pieces of his aura training that he hadn't, apparently, forgotten. Harry found him at the east wall at 8 o'clock, and he looked right. Harry himself went back to the vault. He retrieved the dark steel sword from its stand, which came up into his hand with the same ease as before. He also took 3 other items that the Ravenclaw inheritance told him were relevant, a small bronze mirror that Rowena Ravenclaw had used for distance sight, a ring of iron keys that opened nothing in the physical world but created fixed points in a magical field, and a letter from the vault's deepest shelf that he'd been putting off reading and now carried in his breast pocket. He read the letter in the study at 9 o'clock, standing at the window with the morning light full on the page. It was from his mother. He didn't know how she'd known to leave it, the vault, the blood magic, the inheritance archive, perhaps all of it worked in ways that included preparation he wasn't supposed to understand yet. The handwriting was the same as the spell notes on the study desk, quick and clear and unflinching. Harry, if you're reading this at the right time, and I think you are, because the archive works that way, then you've already done most of the hard things and you're standing at the window the morning of something large. I want to tell you something about the night of October 31st, because you should know it properly before you're finished. I didn't die for you in the sentimental way stories make it sound. I died because there was something the King's line needed more than it needed me to survive, a seal, a confirmation that the blood was worth protecting. My death activated something in you that even Voldemort didn't understand he was creating. The sacrifice wasn't just love. It was the oldest magical covenant in the world, the sovereign gives themselves for the land they protect, and the land answers. You did not inherit a burden, Harry. You inherited a gift that was paid for at a terrible price, and the right thing to do with it is exactly what you're doing. I am so proud of you. Don't be careful today. Be exact. Mum Harry stood at the window for a long time. The garden was gold in the morning light, and somewhere out in the moorland beyond the manor's grounds, Neville's preparations were settling into the earth, and Hermione's wards were threading through the landscape with the elegance of very good legal writing applied to space. And somewhere to the north, moving south, the frequency in Harry's blood was getting louder. He put the letter back in his breast pocket. He picked up the sword. Voldemort came at noon. Not alone, Harry had expected that. He came with 6 Death Eaters, which Harry had also expected, and with Nagini moving ahead of the group through the grass of the manor's approach, which was precisely where Neville had placed the first tentacular barrier. Harry stood at the manor's front gate and watched them come up the long drive. He was alone at the gate, which was a choice that he knew looked like arrogance and was actually precision. The others were deployed through the grounds in positions that the strategic wards would funnel Voldemort's people toward and that were, to anyone approaching from the drive, not visible. Voldemort looked different in daylight. Harry had seen him in the graveyard by night, in dreams, in fragments. In the afternoon sun of a British summer, he looked exactly like what he was, a man who had chosen to stop being human and had succeeded, at profound cost. Tall, pale to the point of translucency, red eyes moving over the manor's facade with the recognition of someone seeing something they'd been told about and finding the reality accurate. Nagini slowed 20 feet ahead of the group. Her head came up. She tested the air, moved 3 feet to the left, tested again, circled right. She was looking for a way through the barrier she couldn't see but could feel. Voldemort watched his snake with the particular quality of attention he gave to things he valued, and then looked at Harry. "You've become interesting," Voldemort said. His voice was the same as the graveyard, that flat resonance that wasn't a voice so much as a command to be heard. "The Wizengamot. The seat." He looked at the manor with an expression that Harry read as professional. "Your mother's wards, improved." "My own wards," Harry said. "My mother's principles." Voldemort's eyes moved back to him. "The prophecy is still in motion." "The prophecy is a poem someone wrote about something they saw in a possible future," Harry said. "I've made other arrangements." The 6 Death Eaters were spread in a loose formation behind Voldemort. Harry recognized Bellatrix on the far left by her posture alone, coiled, electric, the contained frenzy of someone leashed and resenting it. The others were senior, experienced, the kind who'd been here since the First War. Voldemort moved forward, and Harry felt the manor's wards engage, not stopping him, not repelling him, but the subtle dampening effect of the blood claim on a magic that had stolen and did not belong. Voldemort felt it too. The slight pause in his step said so. "You feel it," Harry said. "The land. It knows the difference." "Parlor magic," Voldemort said, but the dismissal was slightly too quick. "You have a piece of me in you," Harry said. "The night you attacked me in Godric's Hollow, the curse took something back with it. A fragment of the king's line." He watched Voldemort's face for the reaction and found it, a fractional tightening, the acknowledgement of a true thing being said. "You've been bound to this land by it ever since. You keep coming back to Britain. You always come back." He paused. "That binding breaks tonight." Voldemort looked at him for a long moment. Something moved in the red eyes, not fear, something more complex. The recognition of someone who has been operating under an incomplete understanding of a situation and is revising. "You've been in the archive," he said slowly. "My grandfather's very thorough. Fleamont Potter." Something contemptuous and simultaneously genuine in the way Voldemort said it, the contempt of a man who had dismissed something that turned out to matter. "You've been having conversations with a memory. And the memory had better information than anything you've had access to," Harry said pleasantly. Voldemort raised his wand. 3 things happened at once. Nagini lunged left around the tentacular barrier, or tried to. Neville's enchantment held, and the great snake recoiled with a sound that was furious and disoriented, circling back toward Voldemort's side. The 6 Death Eaters moved, and found Tonks and 2 of Bones' Aurors coming out of the manor's left wing, and Sirius stepping out from the walled garden on the right, and Andromeda Tonks coming from the east wall with her wand already moving. The Death Eaters were not novices. 3 of them were very good. But they were in a space that had been designed to split them, and they were operating at full power in land that was not neutral, and they were facing people who had spent 4 hours specifically preparing for this and had the advantage of every choice made today being theirs. Harry gave Voldemort his full attention. The first spell came without preamble, a killing curse that Harry stepped aside from, not dramatically, just not being where it was aimed. The Ravenclaw combat instinct was the cleanest analytical gift he'd ever felt, not telepathy, not foresight, something more like the chess player's sense of where the board was moving 3 steps ahead. He felt it in his feet as much as his mind, a constant spatial awareness that told him not where to go but where not to be. He didn't cast the killing curse back. He didn't use any of Voldemort's toolkit. What he used instead was old magic, the kind the Emery's line carried the way soil carries minerals, present in everything, expressed when pressed. When he raised his wand and cast, the spell that came out was not from any Hogwarts curriculum. It was a binding, a compellence, the same magical principle as the King's Law invocations but weaponized. You will stand and be accounted for, translated into magical force. It hit Voldemort like a wave hits a rock, and Voldemort broke it, because Voldemort was genuinely immensely powerful and Harry hadn't expected otherwise. But breaking it cost him focus. And while he was breaking it, Neville came in from the left. Not to fight Voldemort, Neville was not making that mistake, and Harry had not asked him to. What Neville did was put himself between Voldemort and Nagini, placing the second tentacular barrier line between them, driving the snake further right, further from her master, further from the protection his proximity provided her. Nagini writhed. Voldemort felt it, Harry could see him feel it, the Horcrux connection between them like a leash pulled taut. The snake first, Hermione's voice came from somewhere to Harry's right, and then there was a spell Harry had never heard her cast before, Accedo Serpens, one of the old Latin forms, the kind in books she'd been reading since they were 12, and it struck Nagini not as a killing blow but as a containment, a cage of light around the snake's midsection that compressed her movement and her magic simultaneously. Voldemort turned to Nagini with the reflex of someone whose most important thing was being threatened. Harry moved. Not running, 3 quick steps that closed the distance while Voldemort's attention was split, and the sword came up not in a dramatic overhead arc but in the precise, economical motion of the Emery's battle memory activating the moment it was needed. The knowledge arrived in his body the way Fleamont had promised, like remembering something he'd always known, the blade moving with an assurance that was ancestral, not practiced. The sword hit Voldemort's wand hand. Not the body. Not a killing blow. The wand. Voldemort's wand, the elder wood with its core of mystery, was cleaved at the handle where the elder wood met the grip, and the severed wand clattered to the stone path of the manor's drive. Voldemort stepped back, hand bleeding, and the expression on his face was something Harry had genuinely never seen there before. Surprise. Complete, unmanaged, genuine surprise. Harry kicked the broken wand away from both of them, put the sword between himself and Voldemort, and said clearly, "The wand is a Horcrux." Was a Horcrux. The blade destroys it on contact, basilisk venom, Gryffindor inheritance. He watched Voldemort's face process this. For down. Voldemort looked at his bleeding hand. Then at the broken wand on the path. Then up at Harry, and the surprise was shifting into something that was calculation again, frantically, the way a brilliant mind looked when it was discovering the ground had changed under it. "You planned this from the inheritance ritual," Voldemort said. "I planned it from the moment I understood what the connection between us actually was," Harry said. "You stole something that belongs to this land, and this land has been holding it against you for 15 years. When you lose the wand, you lose the anchor. You're already feeling it." He watched Voldemort's face. "The binding is breaking. Your connection to this territory, your certainty about Britain as your ground, you can feel it going." Voldemort raised his other hand, and the magic that came out of it was raw and uncontrolled in a way Harry had never seen from him, wandless and enormous, the kind of power that didn't need a wand but was harder to aim, darker and more diffuse. Harry raised the sword, and the king's line pulsed through it, the same gold light as the basin, as the stones, as everything, and the raw power broke against it the way water broke against a pier. Around them, the Death Eater battle was ending. The Aurors and Sirius and Andromeda were efficient and the grounds had done their work. Harry could hear it resolving in the background without needing to look. "Tom," Harry said. Voldemort went very still. The name, his given name, the Muggle name he'd stripped from himself, landed in the air between them like a stone in still water. "I'm not going to kill you," Harry said. "Not because I can't, not because I'm afraid to, because you're already finished." The Horcruxes are gone. You're mortal. You can keep fighting and I'll keep meeting it, or you can be taken into custody and face what you've done in front of the law that now has teeth. He paused. The king's law, specifically. Voldemort looked at him for a long moment. The red eyes were doing something complicated, running scenarios, Harry thought, with the focus of someone brilliant who had been outmaneuvered and was checking every remaining exit. There were none. The wandless magic came again, larger, the kind of last throw that said the caster knew it wasn't going to work but was making the attempt anyway. Harry met it with the sword and the compellence and the full weight of the claim, "You are on my land, in my territory, beneath my authority," and the magic broke, and dissipated into the summer air of the Potter Manor grounds. Voldemort was on his knees. Not dramatically. Not with theater. Simply, on his knees in the gravel of the drive, one hand bleeding, the other pressed to the earth, the mortal body that he'd spent 25 years armoring and reinforcing and protecting now the only thing he had, and it was tired. Harry lowered the sword. Amelia Bones came around the manor's east corner, and she had 6 Aurors, and she moved with the efficiency of someone who had been waiting for the right moment and knew it when she saw it. She didn't look at Harry as she passed him. She moved to Voldemort with 2 of the Aurors and the kind of professional certainty that the head of the DMLE brought to things she had been waiting to do for 20 years. "Tom Marvolo Riddle," she said. "You are under arrest under the full authority of the King's Law and the magical laws of Britain, which have just acquired considerably more teeth than you were expecting." Harry stepped back. He watched Bones and her Aurors work with the clean satisfaction of something resolving the way it was always going to resolve, once all the pieces were properly in place. He looked at the broken wand on the path. He looked at the gravel where Voldemort had been and was now being bound, efficiently and without ceremony. Neville appeared at his right shoulder. His robes were grass-stained and he had a cut on his left forearm that he wasn't paying attention to. He looked at the scene in front of them for a moment. "Right," Neville said. "Right," Harry agreed. Hermione arrived from the left, her satchel somewhat worse for the morning's events, her hair entirely committed to its worst behavior, her expression the one she wore when something very large had just been resolved and she was already thinking about the 17 other things that needed to happen now. She looked at Voldemort being bound. Then she looked at Harry. "The cup," she said. "Gringotts, August 6th, Harry said. "Already scheduled with Ragnarok." "Then that's the last one." "Then that's the last one," he confirmed. She looked at him for a moment, and then, very briefly, she closed the distance and put her forehead against his shoulder, and Harry stood still and let her, and the summer morning was very bright and very quiet, and somewhere on the drive Sirius was saying something that made Tonks laugh, and the sound of it moved through the old stone of Potter Manor like something returning. The formal record was made the following morning, in a session that Amelia Bones ran with the particular efficiency of someone who had been waiting to write this entry in the Ministry's legal record for a very long time. Tom Riddle, formerly Lord Voldemort, formerly he who must not be named, currently a mortal man in Ministry custody with no wand and no Horcruxes and 23 outstanding counts of murder, was formally charged and held pending trial under King's Law. The magical Britain that woke up on August 5th was not, Harry noticed, immediately celebratory. It was more like the feeling after a thunderstorm, the air changed, the pressure gone, people moving through their days with the tentative quality of those testing whether the quiet was real. Owls moved back and forth through the prophet's office for 12 hours straight. The leaky cauldron was packed before 9 in the morning. Harry sat in the study at Potter Manor and read the prophet's front page, which had a photograph of him and Bones from the morning session and a headline that read, "The King's Law, How Harry Potter Ended the War Overnight." He noted that the photograph showed him looking slightly distracted, probably because Hermione had been talking in his ear about the Horcrux documentation while it was taken. He set the paper aside and opened the memory archive. Fleamont was sitting in his chair with the expression of a man who had already heard the news, which was impossible and also entirely in keeping with how the archive worked. "How did it feel?" Fleamont asked. Harry thought about the moment on the drive when Voldemort had gone to his knees. Not with triumph, with something more like completion, a circuit closing. Like the right ending to a story I didn't write, he said. But that I was always supposed to finish. Flemmont nodded slowly. What comes next? Harry looked around the archive library, the shelves, the preserved memories, the warmth of it. He thought about the Wisengamot and the Ministry and Bones's list and the renegotiated Goblin Accord that was already in draft stages and the matter of Azkaban that needed addressing before winter, and the long work of building something out of the rubble of 25 years of fear. Everything comes next, Harry said. The fighting was the easy part. It always is, Flemmont said, with the slight smile of a man who has been waiting to say that for exactly this long. Harry laughed. Genuine, full, the kind that surprised him. He heard it echo in the archive library and decided he didn't mind. The archive was patient. The work was waiting. The land was quiet for the first time in a generation, holding its breath in the particular way of things that have been under pressure for a very long time and have finally, been given permission to rest. Harry picked up the book his grandfather had left him, slim, unhurried, the handwriting clear, and turned to the next blank page. He had things to write down. The blood had held. His mother had said so, and the basin had confirmed it, and the earth had moved, and the old laws had woken up, and the king's line had reached the end of its long wait and found what it had been waiting for. Harry Potter set his quill to the page and began.